All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the channel. My name is Douglas A. Burton. I'm an author, and tonight we're going to be talking about the Kennedy era at Lucasfilm. This is our fifth part of the discussion, and we're going to be zeroing in on the years 2019 in the wake of the sequel trilogy to 2021, which I call a period of civil war, because a lot changes at Lucasfilm. The tone of the company, the tone of the public interface, the types of discussions fans are having, it all switches. It's also a big leap from Lucasfilm, from the big screen, which was the event. You know, Star Wars was always an event at the theaters. Now we're going to shift to the streaming services. So there are three main wars that we're going to be covering in this period: the culture war, the streaming wars, and the Lucasfilm civil war. So as we get into that, let me introduce my guests. First and foremost, we got Heath Robinson. You want to tell everyone where they can, who you are and where they can find you?
Oh, yes. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Heath. My main channel is the Heath's Geekverse channel here on YouTube, where I stream right now on Sundays and Wednesdays for tabletop gaming. And I've got a lot of other videos on tabletop games as well, role-playing games. And then we got to know each other because we kind of broke off the table talk discussion from the tabletop discussion, where we're talking about stories and storytelling, and that's on the Table Talk channel, where Doug and I have done some deep analysis on some stories, like going really deep into Star Trek 6. Retro's been on the channel, Cameron's been on the channel, so we've had some great discussions over there.
Awesome. And Retro?
Yeah, my name is Retro Nerd Girl, and I do a lot of retro reviews of older movies and TV shows, and also every Saturday you can find me doing a watch-along, watch parties on my channel. So come and check me out there. I'm also on X, so you can see what I have posted there too.
Yep, awesome. And she's got some great videos and live discussions and watch parties.
Oh, thank you.
Cameron?
Hi, so yeah, it's wonderful to be on to talk about a subject that haunts me forever and I can never escape from, you know, this Lucasfilm Civil War. But yes, so yes, best way to get to know me, and I know you and others are members of my Patreon, and so, you know, I'm sure we'll throw in a link here into the video.
Yep.
But yeah, come join me on my Patreon, which is the best way to connect with me and you know, find out my opinions on things. You may not always agree with my opinions, but you know, hopefully you'll be welcome to express yours there. And also I get a few breaking insights from some insiders. We just recently, as of this week, got a new insider who introduced themselves from Amazon, who I've confirmed works inside of Amazon, has been giving some interesting information as what's happening inside of Amazon. Hopefully that relationship will keep developing. We'll get more scoops from them. And yeah, and if you, and on through my Patreon, you can also do consulting, screenwriting consulting. Heath knows of that. Heath has all introduced me to people who have used as well. Douglas, you know, my screenwriting, novel consulting, all of that, and it's helped people. I think it's helped people a lot. And so come by and join me, and we'll jump right in. We've got one more lovely lady to introduce.
Lorena?
Okay, well, yep, I'm Reina Creole over on YouTube. I call it spicy pop culture and sci-fi analysis, and I also do streams about theme parks. But I love films, which is why I have watch parties for some great films from, we'd say, the 70s up to the early 2000s, which Retro Nerd Girl joins me for. And we just have a great time talking about these films. And sometimes we even get people who have worked on that particular film in our chat.
Yes.
That's right. So yeah, and just a little extra context for everyone listening. Kamran works in Hollywood as a screenwriter, and so he is privy to information and just the street beat, and also some behind this, some inside baseball, as they say.
Yeah, and just I've had the experience of watching the hot dog getting made over 24 years, and as like I said, people who work at McDonald's don't tend to eat at McDonald's, right? Once you see what's happening, you just don't tend to be there. And I'm still in the kitchen, and so it's hard sometimes to believe what happens here because it doesn't seem to make sense. We're going to talk about that.
We will talk about that. And Lorena also, just for some added context, also specializes in the theme parks, of which Lucasfilm and Disney and Star Wars are very much a part of, especially in this culture war. There's a lot of contentious stuff, just theme parks. So Galaxy's Edge, and next video, I think we'll get to the Galactic Star Cruiser. So there's plenty to talk about there as well. So we definitely have a nice range of perspective and expertise on the panel tonight. So to lead off, get into, we're going to culture war part of this in 2019. We touched on it last week, the Girlboss cinema phenomenon that began, which Rey Skywalker, or at least in The Force Awakens, Rey Skywalker is very much a part of, if not a standard bearer, into ushering this in this new sort of heroine-centric type of storytelling or character. A sort of negative portrayal, I would say, for the Girlboss. So just a quick recap. We had some very hero-centric stories leading up to this already, before the culture wars really got hot. So before 2014, you had Twilight. That made a lot of money. You had the Game of Thrones phenomenon, which was a global event, very hero-centric, very strong heroic women. You had Finding Dory. You had Hunger Games, Maleficent. The Marvelous Miss Maisel was good on streaming, and Ex Machina, which we'll be covering next week, Retro. 2015, you had Mad Max Fury Road, where you had a heroine kind of take over what had been a male-centric franchise with Mad Max, and I would argue was very successful. It was Oscar-winning, Mad Max. Force Awakens came out with Rey to kind of reset the tone, a flagship franchise. And then, of course, in 2016, you had Rogue One with Jyn Erso. You had Hidden Figures. These are all relatively good, if not great, stories with heroines leading the way. And then you had Ghostbusters in 2016, the all-female one, and this kind of set a new tone. It got itself very involved in the culture war and the presidential elections, and it got contentious. And then in 2017, you had Wonder Woman, which I would argue is very good. And then you had Doctor Who taken over by Jodie Whittaker, a little bit more of a backlash. You had The Last Jedi come out, which fans mostly rejected. 2018, Ocean's 8. The Incredibles 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, all of which moved heroines to the forefront. So here we are in 2019. And 2019, I believe, is peak Girlboss cinema. One of the first films that came out that year, as everyone will remember, this was March of 2019, was Captain Marvel. This was a big deal because it was a female-centric Marvel film, and Marvel was red hot at the time. So anyone want to jump on this one?
Well, I'll say this because I think this is very interesting subject matter. A lot of people were really, really excited for this movie when it was announced. But what really hurt the movie, but it didn't hurt the sales too much because it was Marvel. I think people were just looking forward to it being a part of this big story, was that Brie Larson came out with some really interesting responses about men and also the type of men that would probably be watching this movie. And so there was a conflict with the fans, but they still showed up for the film, which was really quite interesting. They're still interested and taking part in, the buffet that that the MCU had to offer. So I thought this was a very unique and interesting situation here, but it did kind of light a flame where people were looking at starlets or people in general who had this very hostile opinion of the fans.
Right. And that became kind of a feature of this girl boss cinema, the negative side of this, where we are seeing these mega breakouts at the box office. Force Awakens, Last Jedi, they're still crossed $1 billion. So did Captain Marvel. But then you hear, and I'm just going to admit, I did not hate Captain Marvel when it came out. I was not part of the culture war, the fan backlash. I did not hate this movie. I didn't think it was the greatest, but I didn't hate it. It has aged poorly, mostly because of my growing dislike of some of what you're talking about, Retro. It's hard to not see Brie Larson.
Yes.
Instead of just Captain Marvel anymore when you hear what she had to say. And Cameron, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a thought, but it's broader than this. And maybe it'll help the conversation we're going to have overall today. Is that we have to look at all of these things as part of time periods. And
Yes.
the time period that we're looking at here, we're talking this 2018. So we're essentially looking at the rise of Trump time period, right? So that's about 2015, 2016, 2017, right? So that's about the time when we have an interesting polarization in American conversation about a lot of things, particularly about gender. And so Hollywood went to Hollywood sort of, seeing the rise of Trump and seeing the rise of the Me Too movement and all of that, Hollywood went to a very intense place where the only official narrative that you're allowed to say were certain talking points. Women good, men bad, toxic masculinity, blah, 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 blah. Trump is so we had a very, very narrow range of what you were allowed to say in Hollywood if you wanted to survive. And Hollywood, being the bubble that it is, wasn't even aware that these ideas that it was promulgating internally might be in conflict with the audience, because it's not aware of the audience. Certainly the generation of the time that we're dealing with was disconnected from the audience, right? I don't think like Louis Mayer and Jack Warner were not disconnected from the audience, but that's 2 generations before, right? This generation was very disconnected. And so you have people like Brie Larson. She was speaking to what she assumed was a friendly crowd and was repeating talking points that she were well received by that crowd and were well received by Hollywood, and I'm sure people were quite startled in Hollywood that others did not receive her comments that well. And similar to other movies that were being made at the time, including The Last Jedi, including the Ghostbusters with the women and all of that, they were all part of a phenomenon of attempting to fight the toxic masculinity of the Trump era or the upcoming Trump era. And that's where Hollywood was. And they were quite startled and shocked that the response was resistance, because Hollywood is used to shaping people's perceptions. It is not used to being against the general public. It is used to manipulating the general public. And this was a phenomenon that led to initially anger, disbelief, and doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down, because this is a system that has been our propaganda arm since at least the 1930s. There's a wonderful book by a University of Texas professor, not a conspiracy theory book. It's scholarly work by University of Texas professor called The CIA in Hollywood, which tracks how the intelligence agency has worked with Hollywood, going back to Casablanca, before the CIA, going back to the OSS, where Casablanca was essentially a propaganda film to try to convince Americans to get into World War II, because Americans didn't want to get into World War II prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. They had no interest in it, majority of Americans. They wanted to get out of it, right? And so this was something, we got Humphrey Bogart, the biggest American star, fighting the Nazis. Well, there were no Americans fighting the Nazis at the time when the movie came out, right? And so this was part of the plan. So Hollywood is used to controlling the masses. It was not used to the masses questioning a message. And its reaction was, this is all part of this Trumpist, barbaric thing that we're going to quash down. And as we saw history and where we are today at the moment, they didn't quite quash it down, but they learned a lot of lessons about where society is. And I would suggest that the era in which Ms. Brie Larson spoke is over now, even though we still hear some random echoes of it. But that's my thought, is I think we are looking at a remnant of a time.
Well, and that's why I'm presenting it this way. Like, we've always been like midstream in the culture war. And I feel like something has changed. And now that Kennedy, I believe, is going to leave at the end of 2025, now I'm like, this is the bookmark. Let's look at this as its own historical era now, because I think things have changed. And now we look back at this and we can see, we could see it for what it was. This was a very controversial take on female characters and female leads and the audience. These positions were arguable at best and completely incorrect or wrong and belligerent at worst. And the fans are reacting to this. So Captain Marvel came out, and there's comments, and we talked about this in the last stream, where I was beginning to see this a belief system, an ideological belief system, beginning to steer dialogue, character choices, film decisions in Hollywood. And I think a lot of us, especially if you were a Gen Xer or Xennials, we grew up with movies. We loved movies. That's why we're all here tonight. So it was definitely a little stunning to feel alienated by this industry that we had admired for so long. This is where the Oscars started to take a hit. Something I used to watch religiously. Retro, I think we spoke about this. We would all get together for the Oscars, and the Oscars are facing irrelevancy, which is hard for me to believe. So also that in 2019 alone, so this is Captain Marvel, Game of Thrones season 8, the infamous season 8 comes out in 2019, and they went hard. They already had really powerful female characters leading multiple roles across this, leading up to and they went hard into it. And Game of Thrones is one of the classic, if not the most infamous examples of how to collapse an epic show, an event. Also, Toy Story 4 came out this year, where a little Bo Peep is kind of moved to the center of the story. And we have this one. This was one of the first times I was ever invited to a premiere before it came out, or an early viewing. Another beloved franchise. This came out in 2019. Terminator: Dark Fate. Sarah Connor comes back. Lorena, do you have any thoughts about this one?
Oh, this broke my heart for a couple of reasons. One, the Terminator movie, I absolutely loved it, along with Ellen Ripley. Oh my gosh, Sarah Connor up there, like my ideal female heroines. Loved them to death. The other Terminator movies they were okay. They were fine. And I thought about seeing this one, and friends of mine who also loved Terminator said, do not see this movie. And I said, why? And they said, well, they killed John Connor right within the first 5 minutes. I said, you have got to be kidding me.
Unbelievable.
It stunned me, and I'm just like, why? That's what I'm thinking. Why would you do that? It wasn't some no-name red shirt. This was John Connor, who was basically Sarah Connor's reason for living, reason for fighting, all of that. And they just totally eliminated that. And as far as I was concerned, they just basically killed the character of Sarah Connor for me. So I was not happy. And if supposedly I was the audience for that, they just did not understand their true audience when they did this.
And there's some truly cringeworthy dialogue in it that I couldn't believe made it into the film. One of the things, there's a certain very narrow feminist take on Terminator that her only value is as the mother of John Connor, just a vessel, and it's all about John. And I completely disagree with that take. And I thought that Terminator: Dark Fate steered hard into that and went so far as to say John's nothing. It's all about something else. And I think they completely missed the point.
They had a point. They had a point. The point was why was John Connor killed? Remember, in this time period, why is John Connor killed? Well, he's a white male savior, which in this era of the Trump time, first Trump administration, is something that Hollywood is labeling as the adversary, right? Mm-hmm. And so he had to be. This was the entire period of erasing history. Remember, this is also a generation of millennials, because I was also working on TV shows at the time that were being run by 26-year-old millennials. I'm a 45-year-old man working for these 26, 27-year-old millennials with no experience who were being given the job because they had the right political connections or said the right things on Twitter, literally. And these people were at the time saying things like this in the room, that we have to, erase the white male legacy. I mean, they're saying stuff like this. You're like, this is the boss, 26-year-old inexperienced, 27-year-old boss, who is a white female but loves to throw white males under the bus, right? So that was the system, and so that's what that reflected. And of course, and being Hollywood, being at the same time, both stupid and greedy. So the greedy part is like, well, the future is Latinos. We know that. So we're going to bring in this Latina girl, right? We can't make it a Latino boy because it's all about males are the problem. So make a Latina girl as the new solution. I mean, this is all calculated from the moment of history that we were in at the time. This was the actual propaganda. I will say this on one of these shows that I was working with this boss with no experience who's spouting all this nonsense all the time, right? I finally got fed up, and I'm not making the story up. I finally got fed up of the anti-white male, anti-white constant drama, to the point that the white males room had to say it. It was like a struggle session. They all had to say it, right? I just got like, what is this? And I'm a brown Muslim guy, right? And I just finally got fed up. And this is what I did. I raised my hand and I smiled and said, I just want to add to the record, I like white people. And I said that, and everyone laughed. And because they thought I was joking, but I'm like, I'm not joking. I'm actually trying to help you understand how idiotic this sounds. The white men are too afraid to say anything, so they're repeating these mantras, right? And I'm like, I'm the brown man, right? The brown Muslim guy. And I'm going to tell you this is embarrassing. But
yeah, because at the end of the day, this is not equality at all. This is creating an agenda that is promoting only one type of person, and obviously they spread from not just wanting straight white males, but also all males altogether. They didn't want to see any
it
males.
got even worse. Yeah.
Agreed.
Which is horrible.
This was one of the first times I was given early access, and I was able to write a review. So, back in 2019, I had just written Faraway Bird. So I was like, oh man, I got to lead off with this like bad review. So I was honest, and I said, look, this is not a good movie. In fact, it's really bad. However, it reminded me, and this was right when I started writing The Heroine's Labyrinth, I was like, the Terminator is a heroine-centric franchise, and Sarah Connor never should have left it in the first place. So I said, all this movie really made me remember is how much I liked Sarah Connor from Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, the journey she goes on. The franchise moved ahead, really focusing on Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I would say without as much success when he became the star. So Sarah was the star, and what disappointed me as much as anything else, I had a pie chart equal on there, was even though they brought Sarah Connor back, she was still a passenger in this story. She wasn't really it wasn't really her story. So anyway, this contributed to, in my opinion, this is another landmark franchise that went this way. Where you had the girl boss phenomenon happening, and this one had it pretty hard, and then of course you have Star Wars. I don't have the movie poster here, but Star Wars Rise. Yeah, Charlie's Angels come out in this period. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, which is a kind of a misnomer, I would say. All of these came out in 2019. And the Rise of Skywalker was in December to close out the year. So this culture war is red hot. And the weird pattern that we saw from The Last Jedi, where the fans are like, ooh, I don't know, I don't like it. And the media and social media and smaller sub-medias all coming out against the fans in unison, in lockstep. That became the playbook for every film that seemed to be coming out that fit this model. So Lucasfilm is at the forefront. They're a standard bearer marching on with this, and they're very much in this. And Rey became, I would say, one of the faces of the girl boss problem. Do you agree, or do you have a different take on that, or?
Well, let Heath speak. We didn't have to let the white male speak. I'm the white male. I care about you, Heath. I defended you and lost my job. I defended you.
He defended you in the writer's room.
Oh, Heath, I think your volume's off.
See, well, you're muting yourself. That's what happened. All those white males on my show had to mute themselves.
Self-censorship.
Can't
It's
hear
still not coming through.
See, this is symbolic. It's symbolic. All right. Well,
We'll
such
come
is the way-
back to you, Heath.
such is the way.
We'll come back to you.
Did
But
you want to sign out, Heath? Come back in. Maybe it's something in your system.
Yeah. Try that. Yeah.
we'll get Heath back here in
You
just
got
a
rid of the
second.
white male. This is the way it works.
We got one of them out of here. So, but yeah, so you see that Lucasfilm, despite being its own problem in and of itself, is actually in the bloodstream of the culture war. It's right up front. It's right up front. It's leading the way, I would say, in many ways, under the leadership of Kathleen Kennedy. This is now a conscious decision, not just by Lucasfilm, but you see other studios lining up to kind of toe this same position. And bizarre, just go after the fans, like willing to attack the fans. And I remember as a fan, how frustrating it was knowing that these were not good films and having to read in 360 degrees wherever I looked that I'm the problem. It was everywhere. So that was a big thing. And this is in the wake of the Rise of Skywalker. And so to make a transition into the streaming issue, Star Wars was in a pretty hard spot after the sequel trilogy. It really was rejected. You had the kind of fake super fans out there, and nothing rude meant to anyone who actually does like them. But there was a class of super fans that were very much in your face, and I don't even know if they ever really cared about Star Wars that much, but they were willing to go after the old fan base pretty hard. And I think Lucasfilm got, a shot of cortisone, like in a Pulp Fiction. They got that shot, and they popped back up again. And it's streaming. Disney decides they're going to launch their own streaming service, and they're going to bet the farm to go after Netflix. And this was received with a lot of optimism, almost blind optimism, that the streaming wars is going to heat up. All these other streamers started to buy IPs to stack their libraries in order to load up. And you could hear Yoda say, begun the streaming war has. Disney launches D+ in November 12th of 2019. Okay, this is when D+ is launched, and the first thing that they come out with, The Mandalorian. And Kamran, I'm very interested in your take on this because there we go. What's up, Heath?
Maybe you can hear me.
Yes. Yay.
So last episode when we were talking, we mentioned just a small little blip on the radar that Jon Favreau was being brought into Lucasfilm as just another director, one of a million directors that come in and out of Jon Favreau is going to come in and he was going to direct some live action Star Wars show and some Disney streaming idea. That was a small-ish announcement at the time, swallowed up in the collapsing star of the sequel trilogy. Well, not only is Jon Favreau going to single-handedly swerve Star Wars back onto the highway, he launches The Mandalorian, and he very much inserts himself, I believe, into Lucasfilm as a competing vision for what Star Wars can be and should be, and it is completely antithetical to what the Kathleen Kennedy vision is. Kamran, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, this is why I'm even on here on YouTube. This is why I even have a Patreon. I was just a writer living the anonymous screenwriter world because most of you never see any screenwriters. We all grumble about our anonymity, right? While all the actors take all the awards and the fame for the words we give them. But yeah, I was in the anonymous screenwriter world, and I was like any other fan, frustrated by these events that you're describing and The Last Jedi and all that. What actually got me into this world so that I can be on your lovely panel is that I have a friend who is one of Jon Favreau's inner circle. He works at a high-level crew member on a lot of his movies and projects, right? And so we just got together for lunch one day, and it was actually in 2020, about a month before all the lockdowns happened. So I remember quite vividly when we could get together for a nice lunch before the world was turned upside down. So it must be February 2020, right? And so we got together, and I was, talking to him about the events that are happening and how Favreau is, like we said, being brought in and he's like, oh, John, which is his buddy, is his boss. John, he's like, John hates what Disney is doing with Star Wars. John hates it. He told me, he's like, John hates The Last Jedi. He thought it was a soulless movie. He's like, what is happening here? And he's like, this isn't the movie. He was saying these Star Wars movies are what inspired John, like many people of my generation to become filmmakers, right? And so he's like, so he was horrified. And this is what he claims. I don't have this from Jon Favreau myself, but this is what he told me at the time was, so John apparently claimed, well, John had told him that, you know, I reached out directly to Iger and I said, you know, hey, Bob, can I help you with this? You guys don't know what you're doing. You guys are messing up a golden goose here. Can you let me get involved in this process? Maybe I can put you on the right track, right? And so I shared that story in a comment on like Jeremy Griggs's, you know, Geeks and Gamers video once. And then Jeremy's like, who is this guy making this claim here? And he reached out to me. He's like, you want to talk about this? So I came onto Geeks and Gamers and shared the story. And then voila, here I am as a somewhat known YouTube personality, right? But yeah, I mean, that has been long since supported by others I know who are very successful screenwriters who know the people who have gone through all the machinations of what happened to Lucasfilm. I mean, if you go to my Patreon, I posted pictures of myself with some of these writers, like the person who, the screenwriter who wrote the original Rogue Squadron, you know, with Patty Jenkins, right? He's a friend of mine. And he shared with me a lot of what happened with his direct dealings with Kathleen Kennedy. Some of stuff that I can't reveal because I don't want his career damage, right? He shared a lot of the inside how the hot dog was made there, and he's shocking even by my standards, right? So all what we're seeing with the Mandalorian and what we have seen since then, since Favreau arrived, is this civil war talking about. As Favreau comes in, apparently of his own, you know, introducing himself into this to try to fix this, right? Out of love for this material and probably personal ambition. He thought this Miss Kennedy ain't gonna, she's driving this to the ground, but maybe I can fix it. Maybe I can become the next person who salvages this and makes it right. So there's personal ambition in that, I'm sure. And he did. And then immediately his arrival is a threat to the world that has been set in motion by Miss Kennedy. And this is the result of the long backlash that they felt from these films. And the Hollywood at that time is becoming culturally aware that maybe this isn't working the way we thought. Maybe the resistance to the fans isn't working. So Favreau's entry into that is the first recognition of the system that maybe we need to adjust a little bit. And then he arrives, he tries to make the Mandalorian, and he has this massive success with Baby Yoda, Grogu, and all this, and he goes with it. But this only understandably increases resentment by Kennedy and her followers, who then are still the bosses technically, right? They're still the bosses, and so they keep inserting themselves into the process. So you got to do this, you got to do that, and then then everything goes to hell when Gina Carano is fired, which John didn't want, right? You know, I think that's I think John created a character of Cara Dune for her. That's public, and he didn't want her fired. And you know, and then everything is thrown in a disarray. All of his plans, his Rangers of the New Republic, which was being built for her, a whole series is thrown out the window. Suddenly, my understanding is, from what people have told me, she was supposed to be in the Book of Boba Fett as originally written. Right. And then they take her out. Now they have a massive hole and they're desperately rewriting the Book of Boba Fett literally days before production begins. And it doesn't quite work. Right. That's what happens when you lose an entire character thread that goes through multiple episodes and you're trying to fix the hole. And then you're like, well, can we fix it? But can we throw in an episode from for that? Can we use one of the scripts from The Mandalorian? We'll take out those scripts, throw them in there, but then now you have a hole in The Mandalorian that you got to fill. Can we throw in? And then Kathleen's like, let's throw in Jack Black for that episode, right? So it all gets crazy.
Yeah, and Cameron, we'll actually get into that because I have some of that detailed. I got dates, I got receipts.
Yeah.
In the early going, though, with just The Mandalorian, it was a little quieter. It was kind of Jon Favreau's foot in the door, right? And I don't know if we saw yet that this was how crazy the Civil War was going to get, because at the exact time that everyone's like, "Oh my God, the sequel trilogy is a joke. They destroyed Star Wars." There's no merchandising. None of the merchandise sold for Rise of Skywalker. The merchandising fell off for The Last Jedi. Suddenly, merchandise is, and then here comes Mando. It's an event. It's on Disney Plus, and merchandise is selling. Baby Yoda, Mando. I remember everything was Mando. Grogu.
Well, I'll tell you, they did not have merchandise for this initially. People had to make they had to make their own Baby Yodas on Etsy in order to even like have some sort of fandom. It was basically fan risen, this whole craze over Baby Yoda. Not 1 ounce of production, like marketing, was put together for this. it
Yeah,
was
because
sort of like,
exactly because Kathleen Kennedy
boom.
said no one's going to care about this, right?
Yeah,
So she's
yeah.
the boss who's going to authorize. John Favreau wasn't the boss; he was a guy trying to come in, and
Right.
she's like, "Yeah, we don't need toys for this. No one's going to watch this garbage from this toxic white male."
And the
Wrong.
and the interesting thing to add, and Retro Nerd goes right, Disney had no merchandise for this. Fast forward to today, Baby Yoda merchandise is on freaking everything, and it is one of the biggest Star Wars merch mover outside of the original trilogy. You cannot swing a dead cat around a gift shop at Disney World without hitting some kind of incarnation of Baby Yoda.
That's right. Well, and I realized what Favreau was doing. He was doing something with the Mandalorian that I think was intentional and smart. I remember when I was watching this, I was like, he's bringing in actors that are really beloved. Where's my picture of Grief? I have a picture of him. I'm not finding it. But he brought in Carl Weathers to play Grief Karga. She was an MMA fighter at the time, mostly known for the MMA fighting. She was just starting to get into Hollywood. And, this is in the Girlboss era. And I actually remember people not liking Cara Dune in the beginning, because they thought that she was actually another girl boss coming in. She's an MMA fighter. She's big. She's tough. She's punching guys and throwing them around, except that she could really do it, so she was much more convincing.
But I want to address that, which comes down to part of where we are now, deeper into this process, because deeper into this process, the truth of a lot of these commentators is revealed that they never cared about these issues, that they pretended to, that the reality is that they were just taking that role. So, over time, we've seen a lot of them flip-flop on their positions because they just discovered they were making money off of being negative. And so when it looked like Cara Dune is part of their standard mantra of the girl boss of Rey, of Mary Sue, they went with that, and then they sensed that the audience liked her, and then they sensed her politics aligned with at least the politics they were alleging to align with, and suddenly they all flipped. And that is a consistent pattern we've seen with people of no integrity in YouTube, which is excluding the lovely people here. But I've dealt with those people of no integrity. They tend to be the most popular people on YouTube, sadly, because they know how to grift that way through it. But if you look at their pattern, they flip as necessary.
Well, and we'll get into that. That's gonna be one of the crown jewels of this civil war here. But in the early going, Jon Favreau's getting started. Now, Heath, you were pretty much out after the sequel trilogy. Did Mando bring you back into Star Wars?
Yes, it did. This was such an event when it was on, and I remember getting the Disney Plus like everybody did. It seemed like in order to watch this. So yeah, I was completely back on board. I loved seeing every morning. Basically, you're seeing people write on social media, whichever one, including Facebook, whatever, about how great last night's episode was. I mean, everybody was watching. I remember watching it with Brianna. She was over here working at my house at the time, and so she watched it with me, and we were watching, and we completely just had fun with it. We had fun watching it. We're like, why couldn't they just do that with Star Wars? That's all you had to do. Just do that. That was great. It wasn't incredibly deep. It was just fun.
Well, I'm sorry. Keep going, Heath.
I said it was just fun. You're back in the world. It gave you everything you were looking for when you were going to sit down and watch Star Wars.
That's right. And, funny enough, I remember my actual reaction. I remember thinking, I'm like, Mando's not blowing me away. It's actually quite safe. When I watched it, I was like, they're not taking big chances. There is a lot of nostalgia in it, but I was like, you know what? You know why this works? The people who made it like Star Wars, and that was evident when you watched it. They liked Star Wars, and you know what? That's kind of something I needed at that time. I needed to watch Star Wars where I felt that the people who made it liked me. The guy who's been there since the 70s, watching this franchise and growing with it and being a fan of it. I had Bantha tracks when I was a kid. I was a part of the Star Wars fandom in 1980. So it was nice to watch a show where I was like, yeah, they get it. They at least get it. They get Star Wars. So, and it was an event. My kids would wake up in the morning. I'd have to wake them up early because it was released on school days. So I'd have to get them up an hour earlier. They'd all come downstairs and we would watch Mando the mornings that the new episodes aired. That was still an event. Was someone going to say something?
Well, let me actually say this. I have to actually reboot because you vanished from my screen. You can still see me, but I can't see you. The entire screen has vanished. So I'm going to reboot my system. Let me come back in. I apologize. Give me a minute and I'll come back in because I actually want to be able to see all your faces because I can't see any of you all. I'll be back. Okay.
So yeah. So the Mandalorian, Star Wars came back right when it died. It came back right away with Mando and you did get to see rather quickly that sides were being taken. If you were a big fan of Mando, you're kind of on the Jon Favreau side. You're not on the Kathleen Kennedy side. You're not on the sequel trilogy side. And, this is when the gatekeeping argument started getting really hot and bothered. And they're making the claim that, this is all fan service. And that if you like this, then you must be a pretty low IQ fan gobbling up simple spoon-fed stuff, while the real Star Wars, the cutting-edge Star Wars, was right there in the sequel trilogy for you, and you missed it because you're a terrible person. So we bought a lot of Baby Grogu or Baby Yoda stuff. His name wasn't revealed yet.
Yes, it was the child.
The child.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, but yeah. Did you guys buy some merch? Some Mando merch?
I wasn't back yet. I wasn't back to Star Wars just yet. I was still silently protesting. Remember that? I was still on the
you're still kind of out of it. You're like, leave me alone on this.
Yeah, only it was Obi-Wan, the series, that brought me back to Star Wars.
Yeah, okay.
Really strange.
In the next stream that we have.
Yeah, that was the one that brought me back. And yeah.
But yeah, this was an event. This was talked about. I remember kids on the Little League baseball team talking about Mandalorian. So like it was actually culturally relevant. Star Wars was culturally relevant again. And I liked it that way because that's how Star Wars always was in my lifetime. Culturally relevant. Even when it was failing with the prequels, it was still culturally relevant. I made the argument that, despite the flaws with the films and the prequels, that it revitalized interest in Star Wars and actually brought millennials to an entire new generation to the table. And they became their own fans. And I think as they aged, the prequels were given a better treatment, better, more favorable view looking backwards. So, Cameron, did you have any other comments on Mandalorian at this stage, the 2019 launch? We haven't got into COVID yet. We're going to get there in a second.
Well, I mean, the 2019 launch, I think, gave people a sense of hope again, right? Which is, okay, I'm entertained by most of this, right? And it was also interesting because a few people were they needed, again, going back to, and I know you want to hold that, but I think it needs to be interspersed throughout. Sure. Some of the commentators immediately disliked it because they presumed that the audience that they were grifting from was going to immediately dislike it because they had run that way. We all disliked The Last Jedi. I certainly did. A lot of people disliked Solo. And so they felt like this is a safe bet, right?
Another pinata.
Yeah. And then they quickly had to backtrack and you see them hemming and hawing within a couple of videos. Suddenly they're all supporting Mando for a while at least. So that first season, I think, gave people hope. And it also intensified this war because it angered the existing power structure of Lucasfilm that this outsider had come in and had taken away their thunder and had essentially proven that the fans aren't necessarily the problem. Maybe the content is the problem, right? And now this was going to create ramifications. So of course, Miss Kennedy was going to start looking for ways to sabotage Jon Favreau. Yeah. And this is just human nature. This is basic, politics at your local Starbucks.
Yeah,
your new employee comes in and threatens the manager at the Starbucks. They're going to find ways to get rid of that employee. This is human nature. It doesn't require Byzantine politics. And I know you're a master of Byzantine politics, Douglas. You've got novels on it, right? It doesn't require that. But if it's true at that level of human interaction, it's true at this level where we're talking about billions of dollars, massive egos, all this stuff. It's much bigger at that level. And then we would see drama at that level unfold.
Well, and this is where you really started to hear for the first time that there might be a change of leadership at Lucasfilm, right? This became a really tired trope in the YouTube sphere because, this idea like, oh man, there's no way she can survive this. He publicly proved that this other vision is profitable. It sells merchandise. Like there's no question the sequel trilogies failed in my mind. There's no question that Mando is successful. There's no question So it seemed like the math was airtight that she had to be going soon. And of course, like Kamran said, human nature is she probably got that sense too and was like, okay, you think Mando's the way to go. I'm going to have something to say about that. And by the way, I have to say, as an author who is writing about Byzantine politics, Miss Kennedy is pretty good at what she does. I think she has run her course at this point, but she managed to, against all odds, to run interference on something that was inevitable, I would say, as early as 2019. And now here we are in 2025. She's still there. So yeah, I did have hope with Mandalorian as this season wore on. I will speak. There's a certain cross-section of the fandom that I am part of. And in 2019, early into 2020, there was something else that they did on Disney Plus that I got excited about. So when Disney bought Star Wars and Lucasfilm in 2012, there was a wildly popular animated series called The Clone Wars, which we've discussed. Disney canceled it. They replaced it with Rebels. Rebels was so-so, got better. And then I hear that they're going to do season 7 of The Clone Wars. And I can't tell you how excited I was. I was geeking out over this. I made a YouTube video way back in 2019 because I was so excited and I wanted people to know who Ahsoka Tano was. Because unless you watched The Clone Wars, you didn't know who this girl was yet. You didn't hear about this Star Wars heroine. And I was huge. And I got to say, Star Wars Clone Wars Season 7, which came out on Disney Plus in early 2020. So it's early. Disney Plus just launched. Mando's successful. Here's Clone Wars. Awesome. There's about 4 episodes I didn't like. It introduced the Bad Batch, actually, in the first 4 episodes in this Clone Wars. And then it ended on some of the best Star Wars there is, the final 4 episodes of Season 7 of the Clone Wars. So with the optimism that Cameron's talking about, I felt it even more. Here, they're giving me something else as a fan that I desperately wanted. I wanted to see more Clone Wars. And this is where the fandom, I would say the general fandom, started to get introduced to the Clone Wars and Ahsoka Tano, which is now also introducing Dave Filoni's vision of Star Wars, which most fans, unless you were a fan of Clone Wars, didn't know too much about Filoni or Ahsoka or some of these characters. But here's the Trojan horse. It got in there with this. So 2020, here we are. Does anyone have anything to say about Clone Wars, by the way? Is anyone else a fan of it the way I was?
I am not. I skipped the Clone Wars, at least this version of the Clone Wars, because I watched the Genndy Tartakovsky version.
That was good too. I loved it.
Yeah, that one I watched. This one I couldn't. It kept putting me to sleep.
Well, there are. So I'll be fair. It's one of these TV shows that are half and half. Half the episodes are like for 6-year-olds, unwatchable for an adult. So I actually kept an Excel sheet and kept track of which episodes are worth rewatching because the good stuff was great. The bad stuff was you had to skip it. So it was definitely a mixed bag if you watch it from beginning to end.
All right, so now I'm going to throw in my personal story here, which I've told other times, and some people have questioned the truth of it. But whatever, believe it or not. I mean, I got my public reputation on the line. Who cares, right? So it's back in it was in 2010. I was up for a job on this new thing called the Clone Wars that was being developed. When this is before Disney has purchased it, this is still Lucasfilm under George Lucas. And I got through the interview process, and I got all the way to this gentleman named Dave Filoni. Met with him at his office, and I was very excited because this was supposed to be the head writer of this new Clone Wars animated series they were going to develop based on the film that had come out. He had Filoni
Which was terrible, the film.
Right. Yeah. But that was what he was doing. And I was told, this is a chance because the writers of this are going to be sent straight to Skywalker Ranch and work directly with George Lucas. So I was like, this is for me a life-changing thing, as a fan, right? And I got all the way through the interview process to Filoni, and I didn't get the job. Ultimately, I then went over to to Disney, ironically, and became the head writer for the Tron Uprising animated series, which you can watch on Disney Plus.
Which is very good, by the way. I've seen it.
Well, it's very good for the first half before I got fired, right? I got fired because I did not like the way some things were being handled, and being the straightforward person that I am, I tried to fix those things, and that's not how you deal with things at Disney. You don't try to actually fix problems. You try to cover your butt so the problem gets over your head and takes out somebody else.
Ooh.
I didn't understand that at the time, and and I fell on my sword
Interesting.
for that. That's before Lucasfilm was purchased by Disney. But so whatever. And but the funny moment that happened in my interview where I knew I lost a job with Dave Filoni. I knew I lost a job. I just knew it. You can tell when the body language changes from really welcoming and excited to this, right? You can tell, right? So it was, I started saying, well, one of the reasons I think I can be of value to you on the Clone Wars is I really think that despite the fact that George had made the original Star Wars for children, there's very sophisticated ideas in it, particularly in the realm of religion and spirituality, and that's my background. I've majored in religion, I've studied it, I've written novels based on religious history, and I said, George, this is historically true, and I have a wonderful biography of George called The Myth Maker, George Lucas, which talks about this, that George was an avid student of other religions as a young man. He studied Taoism, he actually studied Islam, he studied Sufism, he studied all these things. And so the ideas of the Force are largely derived from the Taoist ideas of the yin and the yang, plus Sufi ideas. There's a lot of Arabic actually in throughout Star Wars, going back to the original movies. There's a reason he chose to film Tatooine, in Tunisia. He was very
talk about that.
There's a tremendous amount of Arabic. Jinn, which is like Qui-Gon Jinn or Jinn Urso. Jinn is, the genies there. But even then, even Mustafar, which is the planet of Vader, right? Mustafa in Arabic means the chosen one, which is, that's a direct reference, right? And so yeah, but I'm just saying, but he was very aware of Islam and of Taoism. Those are the two religions he happened to have a lot of knowledge of, which you'd be surprised with George Lucas, right? Born, guy who makes American Graffiti, but he's aware of these other, and he put them into Star Wars. And I started referencing those things about what I really can add value to on Clone Wars. If you hire me to be your head writer, is I really want to bring the mysticism and the sort of spiritual knowledge of these different traditions, because from the Taoist perspective, there's no good or evil. There's just light and dark, and light gives birth to dark, right? And dark gives birth to light. That's why the yin yang the dark has a white symbol, and the white has a dark symbol, because each gives birth to the other. So I said that's how I think George sees the Force, which is that even the Sith, from their point of view, are not evil. Sith see the dark side of the Force as the real nature of reality. It's evolution, right? That the illusion that the world is peaceful is not true. Animals eat each other. It's all about survival. And so the Sith are saying that's how the Force actually works, and you're denying it, that the strong have to overcome the weak. That's the nature of the Force. And I said all this. Turns out I'm kind of right. I mean, that's pretty much what George's philosophy is, right? And I watched Dave's arms go like this, and I could tell I lost the job because he didn't agree with that, or he didn't understand it, whatever it was. And I knew at that moment I was done. So when I was to finish the story, when I then was working at 6 months later, I got hired at Disney on the Tron show, and I arrived there, and one of the people working on the Tron show had worked at Lucasfilm in the past. And one of the executives, the people involved. And when I shared the story with them, they're like, "Oh yeah, Filoni." This was her opinion. It's like Filoni is George's lackey, but he doesn't understand George really, and he doesn't have that level of sophisticated understanding of these things. And the moment you said that, it threatened him, because that's exactly how George thinks, and he can't relate to that or understand it. And putting you in a room with George Lucas, you would have become George's buddy, because you understand this level of mysticism. He wasn't, and he wasn't going to let that happen. Again, Starbucks, you can't walk in and threaten the manager of Starbucks. And I did that accidentally by speaking out of term about things that were maybe above his pay grade in his own mind. So I think a lot of the flaws of the Clone Wars were, maybe his lack of understanding of George's vision. And you'll notice some of the best episodes of the Clone Wars are where he actually gets into the sophisticated stuff, which I think was George inserting it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like some of the Clone Wars is the best Star Wars there is. I'll stand by it forever. There's just some fantastic episodes and sub-stories that I love as much as almost as much as I love the original trilogy and some of these other things. So, also the Clone Wars is where we get Darth Maul coming back, Ahsoka Tano, Bo-Katan, all of these characters come from Filoni's and Lucas's Clone Wars, which have taken over a lot of the Kennedy era. In the void of ideas that they don't have, some of these ideas came flooding in. But so here we are. We're with Lucasfilm, with Disney Plus. They made their big foray into streaming, and of course, the world's about to change because the virus that will not be named, COVID-19 hits. And by the way, this is a kind of a gift to the streaming wars because everyone's at home, right? everyone's at home. No one could go anywhere. You can't do anything. So suddenly there's this massive glut of remember, like Tiger King was really really big.
Oh my God,
The
Tiger King,
Mandalorian.
Yeah, it was like obsessive compulsive disorder. Everyone's
did-
watching that stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it, but man, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so I think Lucasfilm, at a time when The Mandalorian is hitting already, gets an additional boost by a captive audience. Right? We're all at home. We're watching this. I know I watched a lot of Mando during COVID. My kids were home. They couldn't go to school. They were doing Zoom classes and stuff, which was worthless. And watched a lot of Mando.
So yeah, and we start seeing Mando in the second season gets even better, right? It culminates with this stunning moment of the Luke Skywalker return.
Real quick, let me say this. There is, around this time, they come out with on Disney Plus, there's something called like Mando Star Wars Gallery. And it's about the making of the Mandalorian, and it's and John Favreau's in it. They Dallas Bryce Howard's in it. All the director, Carl Weathers, is in, and they have this roundtable discussion. And I remember watching it, and Kennedy is in this, and you can see at one point John Favreau is leading the discussion. He's the man of the hour, right? And he's at this table, and he turns and he's like, "Well, let's go around the table." And let me ask a couple questions about each one of you. Let's start with you, Carl. And he turns to Carl and she goes, "Well," and she butts in and she says some things. And John Favreau goes, well, hold on. Let's go around the table. And she cuts him off again. And I was like, oh man, I'm like, this is right out in front. She's inserting herself into the Mandalorian. She's inserting herself into this documentary. And now she's trying to insert herself into this discussion that they're filming. So it was just painfully obvious, even in this little sideshow, that she's trying to be polite, that fake polite, but she's also definitely trying to say, I'm the boss. You're not going to outshine me. And I really noticed it here in the gallery. If you ever watch it, you'll see how she kind of, her and John go back and forth. And John doesn't look too happy about it.
No, he's like, you can tell he's kind of rolling his eyes and trying to get around her. That's not the action of someone who is a scared employee. So someone is at least feels they've got backing of the boss, the big boss, right? And at this time, I think it's Bob Chapek is still the boss at this time.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And we know Chapek at the time was elevating him to not just being sort of the consigliere on Star Wars, but to be sort of his right hand creatively on other projects, right? That all got sort of thrown up in the air when Chapek lost his job. But he has that confidence of like, man, I'm tolerating this lady, but you ain't really the boss. So we see this conflict.
Right. And at the time, the impression was Favreau's going to win. This is such an easy call. He's making all the right calls. Everything's going well. And so COVID's still going on. Mandalorian Season 2 debuted October 30th, 2020. So we're still deep in COVID. This is still pretty peak COVID. So it airs. And to great aplomb, I think people were really excited about the new season. The merchandise train retro, to your point, really got cooking. This is where Grogu and Mando were everywhere, right? So, and the theme, everyone knows the theme now. It's like become almost iconic with the Mandalorian. So, Mando Season 2 comes out, and I would say successfully. Again, we're getting more of what we wanted.
But we're getting even more. We're getting Luke Skywalker. We're getting what was begged for since I guess not even 2017, since The Force Awakens. We wanted more of Skywalker. And then what happened with Last Jedi, people were like, Luke Skywalker is dead forever. And now we see he's not. Right.
So, and that was an issue. So you also have Bill Burr showing up in these episodes and a character that most people liked. Timothy Oliphant was in there as a fake, like a psych out Boba Fett. Does anyone have anything to say about the season before the season finale?
Oh, like what?
Because we didn't know how it was going to end while it was going on.
Oh.
We were getting some we
didn't know how it was, but it was back. I mean, the show was back. I mean, they were doing it again. I remember this again being a major must-see kind of phenomenon as far as television goes. I was back into Star Wars, loving it. It was I think it was dropped weekly. I think it was, but when it wasn't all at once. And I remember everybody was there again. I mean, they were doing it again.
Would
Yeah.
you say that this is the point in which there was some interruption or some involvement of, changes behind the scenes? Would you say, or am I just
wasn't
imagining
detecting
that?
it on screen so much. In
Okay.
fact, we'll get into the season finale because that was one of Hollywood's best kept secrets, in my opinion. Like,
Well,
nobody-
that's the thing. It was a best kept secret. And from my sources at the time were telling me it was intentionally a secret to the point that Kennedy didn't know it was coming. And
Oh,
when it happened,
let's
she was
get into it because,
outraged.
so I was gonna cover a little bit more of the season, but let's get into
No, we
it.
got to build to this, man. We'll screw around. This is what it builds to. Let's get to it. This is what it builds to. This is the turning, but this is the turning point of everything, including the Civil War, because everything goes crazy after this.
Yeah.
This is when Kennedy
does.
fights back harder.
Right. So this is Cameron's understanding and explanation of what happened makes sense to me. And it's almost like easy. It's almost like reading something in crayon. It's written out for you on this. So no, now I'm at this point, I'm into YouTube. I'm following all these people that the rumor mills are red hot, and nobody called this. The only hint, Cameron, tell me if you remember this. Retro, tell me if you remember this. Lorena, there was the only talk was that Mark Hamill did a face scan for Disney Plus, Lucasfilm. They did something with, they were allowed to use his likeness. And I remember there was some discussion about whether actors should be doing this. James Earl Jones would do it with his voice. So at the time, and this wasn't giving anyone any clues, but Mark Hamill did get involved on that one little level, right? So now I remember watching this episode. I was with my kids. I'm getting ready. I'm looking at the clock. I got to take them to school. And, they're all backed into a corner on that Star Destroyer bridge or that bridge. And an X-Wing comes in. And at the time, I'm just thrilled to see a freaking X-Wing. I'm like, an X-Wing. And then suddenly a green lightsaber ignites. And I remember I was like, what? It was instant pleasure to see a green lightsaber. I was like, oh, cool. And then I saw the black gloved hand. And I remember I was like, no. Like, I was really in a state of paralysis. I was like, what is this? Who is this? And when he took off his hood, and it's young Mark Hamill, right out in 1983, Return of the Jedi. Green lightsaber, the belt up at the top, the black outfit. I was bowled over. I was blown away. I got teary-eyed because, the moment the tears hit me is when R2-D2 rolls up next to him, and I'm seeing Luke Skywalker and R2-D2, his green. I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. What are some other reactions? Heath, let's start with you. Did you see this when it came out?
I think I saw it like the day after or something like that. I don't think I saw it immediately when it dropped, but because I'm on YouTube all the time, as soon as all this happened, there was all of this commotion and thumbnails that were up. I knew that something big had happened, and I don't know why I didn't watch it. That moment where it was going live, but I knew something huge had happened, and so I didn't want to see any of it. So I turned all that off to go and watch this after that. So there was so much energy on YouTube at that time. I was like, okay, I got to go watch this, and it's one of my favorite things on television. It's ever been put on television.
Lorena?
Well, when I actually watched this, well, not on screen, but live during one of Loki's shows, and we were just watching it, and little by little, we're like, no, that can't be Luke Skywalker. It's got to be somebody. It's got to be somebody else.
Yeah.
Got to be someone else. We're just like, no, we can't believe what we're seeing. And when we saw like the glove and we saw like the lights, we flipped out. And when we were watching this live and people in the chat were like, I can't believe it's Luke Skywalker. I can't believe it. It was such a cool, uplifting feeling.
It was totally uplifting. And I think I was mostly stunned because with all the negativity, all the anguish I went through, like just following the story, listening to Mark Hamill talk after The Last Jedi, and the talk of Jake Skywalker and the blue milk scene and just this awfulness. Here's Luke Skywalker in this heroic light, the green. So it was such a magical moment, and it really restored almost in full my faith that Star Wars was not done. That if one glimpse of Luke Skywalker can produce this emotion on a live action TV show, that we ain't done with Star Wars. There's more. Retro or Lorena? Yeah, Retro. What was your thoughts? Did you see it live?
I did not see it live.
Were you still boycotting?
I was still silently protesting, but I did see the scene, and I heard all the hoopla, and I watched all the videos of everyone showing so much emotion. We've got Kevin Smith crying. We got Star Wars Theory crying. His reaction was the best, and everybody just so happy for this moment. I felt intense dread because I was like, where are they going to go now? They've managed to charm everyone with 2 seasons, and now they let Luke Skywalker out of the bag. Are they going to be able to do better? And sadly, I can't say that they have. That seems to have been the pinnacle of what they were able to do. But it was such an incredible moment. I was impressed. I was very impressed.
Well, right. So I think, and we'll get into this in a second, but this was the emergency. The red alert went off in Kennedy's office when this happened, I would imagine, because it galvanized the fans. Not only did I get emotional when I saw it live, because I saw it that morning with my kids, and my kids were like, "What? Why is Dad getting emotional?" I was like, "You don't understand, man." But not only did that happen, these fan reaction videos came out, and the best ones were the ones where you had montages of fan reactions, and you'd get one after the other of people, all colors, all creeds, all type men, women, all people reacting with such shock and elation to the return of Luke Skywalker. I got emotional watching so many people react to it, because the power, it reminded me as a writer, the power of an image, the power of a character, and what he means to a story, what story he came from. And just one glimpse of this guy, what it can do, what it means to so many people, that restored my faith in a lot of ways when this happened. Kamran, did you see it live?
No, and I didn't. I think you'll be surprised to know that, like Retro, I was boycotting. I boycotted the first 2 seasons of Mando, because for all that my adversaries call me a shill, and I've heard that a lot, for Disney or whatever, I was boycotting. Ever since The Last Jedi, I did not watch anything. I was watching videos about these things, but I would not watch it. However, when the news exploded and everywhere that Skywalker was back, that day when I saw the clips, like on YouTube or Twitter or whatever, I saw the clip, and that was enough. So I then went ahead and bought a Disney Plus subscription that day, and I binge watched the entire 2 seasons of Mandalorian to get to that scene. Right?
Oh, wow.
So Retro, you were not alone. You were not alone. I was boycotting because The Last Jedi deeply hurt me. Right. Yeah. And I didn't see Solo, and I didn't see The Rise of Skywalker. I just refused to participate in this crap. Right. And the fact that I was there, and then I started getting sources inside what's happening, and I came to have a deeper understanding of the internal war that Jon Favreau was fighting, and he was winning. As Retro is correct, Retro Nerd Girl is correct. This was the height of when he was winning, and he probably got a little too confident too. He thought, "I've got it. I think Iger was back in charge by now," and he's like, "I'm just gonna pave the way for Kennedy's retirement announcement in a few months, and away we go. And I've got all these plans, and I'm gonna do all this stuff, and I've got Cara Dune coming up with her show. I got all the stuff going." And he might have gotten a little overconfident, not understanding that you're dealing with someone that is a 40, 50-year Hollywood survivor at the highest level of the game.
Well, and what's interesting is Favreau's, he's not a spring chicken. He knows his way around. But I think you're right, Kamran. My impression was that he underestimated Kennedy's desire to fight this out by all means necessary. Included in this, and this is where you could see the Civil War start to take form out in the open, right?
This is when it comes out of the open, because now because this was an egregious action on his part. From what I was told, she was not aware of this scene. To be the president of the studio and to be not aware of this is an actual slap in the face, because she would have said no to it. So he had gotten permission from above her, right, to go ahead and do it, right? And her people were kept out of the loop. And that was seen to her as this guy is conspiring against me, because he is. So what's she going to do?
He is. Right. So Favreau made his move, right? He made his move. He revealed his vision of Star Wars, and he was right. He was right. It was the right call, and the fans.
And it was worldwide news. Worldwide news. That's why I heard about it, because this is the people in Uzbekistan were talking about this, right? All right. And then that was why he did it, because he thought he could shatter Kennedy's final hold with this and prove he was right the whole time. He did.
Well, now, what's interesting is I was a sub to Star Wars Theory, and Star Wars Theory, by the way, in 2020, when this is going on, very neutral guy.
Yes.
Wasn't a shill. He wasn't a hater of the left. This guy tried sincerely to find the good in Star Wars wherever he could find it. He wouldn't turn against the sequel trilogies. He wouldn't turn against the fans. He wouldn't badmouth Lucasfilm. He tried to kind of stay in the middle. He tried really hard to be a neutral Star Wars fan that could talk to both sides of the fandom. And I would say for years he was very successful. And I didn't know it until this, but he had and still has the largest Star Wars YouTube channel in the world. This guy, Star Wars Theory. And if you watch his channel, it's really cool. He comes up, he'll take like
very sweet.
He'll take like, why would Anakin do this? Let's dig into this. And he'll take some obscure part of the trilogy, prequels, whatever, or sequel trilogy and kind of dive in. Well, so here he is, the top of the pyramid of the Star Wars YouTube sphere. He's watching this moment that we all kind of fell apart at, right? Luke hit us all right in the heart. And now Star Wars Theory, our ambassador, right, for the fans in the YouTube space, he's watching this, he breaks down and he cries. And it's sincere. He's not doing it because there's a lot of reaction videos where I can't stand watching them because they're performing for you, right? Mm-hmm. He cried. This man cried as I did, as everyone else did, and because it meant something. And this guy kind of capped it off. Star Wars Theory's in too. He got something out of this as well. Well, in a moment that seemed to be, unambiguously positive, Pablo Hidalgo posts. I thought I had his. Some of these aren't showing up here, but Pablo Hidalgo makes a post making fun of Star Wars Theory, making fun of him on.
And who is Pablo for anyone who doesn't know?
So the structure of Lucasfilm, you have Kennedy at the top. We all know that, but there's something called the Lucasfilm Story Group, and this group has been intact for quite a long time. Back in the Clone Wars animated series before Disney, there was a story group, and Pablo Hidalgo was involved with these guys. Well, this story group, their job is to maintain consistency through all the different medium, the stories, the extended universe. So there's supposed to be a continuity expert. What's on brand, what's off brand. Well, clearly they weren't speaking up under Kennedy, and in fact, under Kennedy, they seem to have been captured and become an organ of the Kennedy vision of Lucasfilm. So Pablo Hidalgo is Cameron. Is he the head of the Lucasfilm Story Group?
I don't know that that's his title. I don't think he's the head. I think he's more of sort of, he's one of these like shifty guys who's always kind of there. You don't really know what his role is. We all know that guy. I think The Office made fun of that kind of character. It's like, what do you do here exactly? He's that guy, right? He's that sort of dude who's like, yeah, I'm the guy that knows a thing or whatever. He's just like always there, right? And so I'm not so sure how much he's always there. This was the beginning of his I'm not so sure how much he's always there, because he, in his hubris, decided to attack this man, who you have established was a beloved and neutral figure who Disney was aware of. They need this guy on their side. And this character, who was, by the way, Pablo Hidalgo was a big adversary of mine when I was on Twitter. And, I was kicked off of Twitter to this day. I've never been able to get back on. No explanation. I really do believe he orchestrated it for complicated reasons, but a lot of stuff he was doing to attack me directly, in my opinion, in any event. But Hidalgo sends this out, and then to his shock, he's forced to call him and apologize.
Yes.
Oh,
He
really?
does, but it was very half-hearted in my opinion. But shots fired, right? The Lucasfilm executives are mocking the fans. And you're like, so Kamran said he had to kind of redact it. He made a half-hearted apology. You got a sense that he wasn't very serious about it. Star Wars Theory, to his credit, responded, but he didn't become irate about it. He tried to keep a level head, even at this point. He tried to take an understanding view of what happened. He's like, well, maybe this, maybe that, almost talking himself into, look, I'm not going to make this any worse than it is. And I remember as a fan being like, no, turn against him. This is the time to turn. But he didn't. He stayed neutral, even under fire at this point. And I think he did so because his love of Star Wars. And I think Kamran shares a little bit of this feeling. Don't become toxic, right? Don't lose your way in the criticism. It's good to criticize and to know what's good and bad, but don't get lost in it. Know what's good too. Be able to say you like something. And I think he was honoring that and tried to keep that intact at this point. Kamran, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, this is a character, who, we talk about Pablo, who has skated by. I mean, he's another example of sort of these guys who just know how to survive this town, right? They're always that dude who's always, like I said, he's the guy that's always there somehow because he figures out who the power structure is. And I'm sure the power structure of Kathleen Kennedy and the politics that were under her regime affiliated with his own. So that made him very comfortable. But he's the kind of guy that will survive wherever he is. But he became very comfortable in that to reveal his true nature, right? Which, is a mistake when reigns of power are changing, right? And so, he sort of jumped. He acted when he didn't realize the person behind the rein of the horse is not the same person, right? And so, but this is the beginning of the chaos that begins now. So this is, right. Yes. At this point, it's like seeming of a victory. He's forced to apologize. This guy who's been openly attacking fans, mocking fans to the point of mocking this poor guy, right? He's forced to apologize. My understanding is that Star Wars Theory did not accept his apology. Said, "I thank you. I don't believe it's genuine." And hung up on him. That's my understanding of it, right? And so we're all like, "This is it. This is the turning point. It's victory." Well, there if we study any Revolutionary War, there were a lot of victories that the American colonial soldiers had that were then reversed. It's the reason it took so many years to get the British out of here, right?
So, and this is going to help me understand what Kamran began to explain to me later, how the system works. So, Mando Season 2 aired October 30th, 2020. The final season was a couple, I think 2 months later, or the final, the Luke Skywalker episode was about 2 months later. So the very next news after this moment, you see him crying. The Star Wars fan is united. The Star Wars fandom is united on December 10th, 2020. So it had to be almost exactly after this aired. Kennedy makes an announcement. She's going to do something called the Acolyte. Did you know that, Kamran, that she announced it almost the day this Luke Skywalker episode aired?
I didn't know the timing of it, but it makes sense, right?
Right. So this
makes
is where
sense. And right. Recall, so this is I think at this point Chapek is still in charge, or has Chapek been outed yet? Chapek gets out. What date does Chapek get outed? Is it the 20?
Yeah, he's like frog marched out just about.
Yeah, it's 2020. It's 2021. Am I right, or is it 2020?
November of 2022.
Okay, so Chapek is still there. Okay, so Chapek is there, and if you recall, Chapek had publicly said we're going to slow down on development. We're going to slow down in Star Wars development. If you go back, you'll find his statements there.
Yep.
And so when she announces his Acolyte thing, it's a direct contradiction of the CEO of the corporation. She's announced his things. And at the time, that set off my red alerts. This doesn't, because my knowledge of how the town works, you don't directly contradict the CEO of your parent company about your development plans. You have permission to do this? And we would discover as the time would continue, as I would report, she did not have permission to announce the Acolyte. And that is actually what later lawsuits would reveal, that she did not have permission. That she announced the Acolyte without any permission, without any of the pieces in place. And it doesn't surprise me that it was on the same date as the Luke Skywalker thing, because that's a desperate action. But now she's announced it. Now what does she have to do? She has to back it up somehow, because you put it in the press. Now you're trapped because you've announced something that has no backing from the big boss and no money. So now you got to cover your ass. Other
Right.
events happening.
This is important to me because it helped me choose who I was going to listen to going forward. Eventually, not at this moment, but eventually.
You didn't believe me initially.
Well, not
You
yet.
didn't believe me initially, but time proved
No.
it.
At this point, Cameron, everyone was listening to you. You were beloved, and you were on all these shows. But Cameron claimed at the time, he goes, "This show will never be made." Okay, he goes, "This show will never be made.
Right,
This
I
never
did say
should have been announced." And by the way, you were correct. It should have never been made, right?
By any rational, even by Hollywood's irrational standards,
Right.
when you go against the CEO of the parent company and you don't have the money for it, it's not going to happen. Well,
Right.
Kathleen Kennedy is a smart cookie, and she found a way.
Well, and not only that, we have to dial back the clock.
Yeah.
She not only mentions The Acolyte's going to be made, they're starting to be, she drops a few rumors. You remember Brie Larson was going to be in this, and Keanu Reeves? Remember that?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So similar playbook, which we'll see in 2023 at Celebrate. She announces the actress. The actress is going to be Brie Larson. She's going to play a Jedi or a Sith Lord in The Acolyte. It's going to be a dark take and blah, blah, blah. She even made a logo for The Acolyte. And I remember, Cameron had said in it, all things being equal, it makes perfect sense. This was never going to get made. This shouldn't have been made. Now that I look back, I see how this works. Kennedy made an announcement with an actress that was becoming despised by the fandom. She, not only are we going to do a new Kennedy project, it's going to be by this actress that the fans don't like. And it's trying to douse some of the fire of this big Luke Skywalker moment, right? Well, guess what happens next in the timeline here?
Well, the next big thing is what happens to
No,
Gina.
actually, there's one other little thing that happens.
Oh, no, yeah, there is one more thing. I remember. There's one more thing that triggered that event, I believe.
So real quick, and that's on deck. The High Republic launches, which is another Kennedy project, January 5th, 2021. This bizarre take on Star Wars is launched. And I remember just hearing about it. They're like, yeah, there's no wars. I was like, no wars? That means you have no conflict. That's going to be a problem. And this is when you get the famous whiteboard. So this is where you have the fans getting a hold of this photo of what we're trying to do. What is Star Wars? And you see diversity on there a couple times. Dinosaurs. I mean, clearly, I've been in groups like this where people are throwing out ideas, and you have someone, instead of saying, no, that's not really Star Wars, they're trying to be nice, like, oh, okay. And they write it on the board, right? So if you read that board, there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't belong there. Dinosaurs doesn't belong. Feelings is on there. Like, we need to discuss feelings. Droids, like, we get it. Droid. Anyway, the High Republic. So there should be surprises. They actually thought they should write that in there. So anyway, this made the rounds. This was a pretty big hot topic. Lorena, do you remember this kind of sweeping through the YouTube space?
Oh, yeah, I totally remember this, because what I zeroed in on was where it says rival houses. And I'm like, what? They trying to be Harry Potter now with Star Wars? When you look at it, it was just like, do they really not pro-war? Seriously?
Yeah,
It says Star Wars,
Well, this is the point where beginning, the whole
I'm sorry.
Hollywood is collapsing, right? It's all collapsing. Like the desperate desire to find some kind of narrative to hold together the extreme wokeism of Hollywood is collapsing down to this, right? Okay.
Well, and Heath, do you remember this coming out?
I do not. I'm looking at this for the first time.
So
Yeah, me too.
a big deal, because similar to like the Tolkien group that got behind Rings of Power, it was very ideologically inclined people who again, my issue is not that diversity is bad. These are not bad, but they shouldn't be priority number one. That's my take. Shouldn't be priority number one. It can maybe be priority 3, 4, 5, who knows? But if you're a writer, it should never be priority one, because it'll cause you to make decisions that might actually undermine the goal, which is to tell a good story. If that's your first priority, your first priority is always aligned with your purpose, right? So your first priority as a storyteller is to be a good writer, to learn your craft, to tell a good story, to learn how to craft scenes. And as I learned with Cameron, learn how to write a script, learn how to do, there's a craft and you have to learn it. If your number one goal is diversity, well, then the craft isn't as important as something else. And that will show up. So this starts to make the rounds, and it does sour the fandom. Brie Larson, the Acolyte talk, the High Republic and diversity, the diversity board, they started to call it. This is souring and I think this is also when Cameron's like, don't take the bait on these things. It's designed to sour the fandom when you're excited, right? Cameron, weren't you saying
I mean,
that?
yeah, I mean, the problem was, again, this goes back to my, you said I was once beloved, I'm no longer beloved. It's because, a lot of the YouTubers that had me on then turned against me, right? Because I held to that stance, right? I held to that stance that, that don't fall for the bait and you're being manipulated. And then I realized a lot of them want to be manipulated. They were baiting their audience. They needed this. They needed the anger for clicks. And when I was coming in, I was spoiling the fun. I was giving authentic things. I like this. I don't like this. This is good. This is bad. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear Star Wars is dead forever. All roads lead to the sequel trilogy. These mantras. And then I was out. Right. And I was out. And I was put to the exile. But she was baiting the fans and the YouTubers were baiting the fans. Present company excluded. So yeah.
Well, and so this is when I started to feel like I'm hearing different YouTubers say different things. This guy claims to know somebody. This guy has an insider. And so this is when I started to notice something. The fandom on YouTube, to which I subscribed, really got together in a protest of The Last Jedi. It was a forum where you had some very entertaining people come out and blast The Last Jedi and pretty much speak for all of us, say what was wrong, say what the legacy media wouldn't. This is garbage. This is bad Star Wars. And what happened around this time during the Civil War, where you now have 2 LucasFilms operating and then different people reacting to each different, you have some people reacting to the Jon Favreau side of Lucasfilm and some people reacting to the Kathleen Kennedy, right? So now I'm hearing 2 different types of YouTubers. And sometimes I was like, they both can't be right. That this guy's saying this guy's saying this, who do you believe, right? Who's telling the truth? But at this stage in early 2021, Cameron was still very much in the heart of this discussion, I would say, and simply countering a few opinions here and there, to no egregious degree. It was still kind of together at this point. 2003 is where it got a major shift. But at this point, it was simply, don't believe the hype. Don't believe this. He's trying to tell you how it works. And I'll just say on my own, and I'd be curious everyone else's take, what I'm looking for in someone who's trying to predict what's happening in the industry, right? We're trying to make predictions. We're speculating. I don't need that person to be right about everything. Okay. I don't need them to bat 1,000. It'd be great, but that's just not going to happen. There's going to be something unexpected, black swan events, whatever. What I'm looking for is someone who is speaking with intelligence, intuition, with experience and expertise, and some general position on the structure of what's happening that I can follow. That's really what I need. I don't need 100% accuracy. So as long as I understand what's going on, I could follow the events. And that's what became the most important thing to me going forward. Heath, were you getting kind of mixed signals around this time with the fandom, like YouTubers, like this guy's saying this guy's saying that? Were you getting any of that then?
Of course, I found Kamran because this is back when I was following a bunch of different channels and the different channels that he was on. But then for the most part, eventually I ended up stopping following several of them, a lot of them getting out of it. Oh, that was fun when we had, the Last Jedi come out and everybody, or even after the Force Awakens, some, everybody goes to YouTube and we all go, but I couldn't take it. Like sometimes I would listen to, like turn on like something on YouTube. I was cleaning the house and I remember, someone who I will not name, but I was going off on some kind of show about something, and the level of vitriol that the person was just spewing on screen was like, what is this person talking? Like, even if you think this movie or the show was bad or whatever. And so I tuned, like, what are you even doing here? So I turned it off and I tuned out of all of that for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lorena, I know you have kind of a love-hate relationship with the fandom. There, like you said, there was a time where we're all in it together, and then sometimes it feels like it's going too far. What was back? If you could dial it back to 2021, where you were, where your headspace was then, where were you with the fans and the protest and the Lucasfilm attacking the fans? Where were you at this stage?
Where was I in 2021?
After Mando season 2, Luke's
After
back.
Mando season
got the High
2.
Republic,
just more of like finding like-minded people who really wanted Star Wars to thrive and were excited, about the Mandalorian. I know I liked it, and I'm like, hey, maybe this can be some kind of renaissance that's going on. But at the same time, you had a group of people and they seemed to get louder and more polarizing, trying to tell you that you're a bad person if you wanted to watch The Mandalorian. If Star Wars falls, it's because of you, and basically telling people what to watch. And that's my biggest pet peeve. I tell people, you watch what it is that you want to watch. My opinion and $2 will barely get you a coffee at Starbucks. I don't know if it still can, or not. I'm going to give you my opinion, but I'm not going to tell you what you should or should not do.
Well, and Cameron, I know on his Patreon, he has a rule that came into existence where you'd have a lot of people commenting and they had never even saw the show, but they would
they were just repeating what other people said, especially YouTubers. This YouTuber made this commentary. And then I was like, well, why don't you go watch that? Because I watched this thing and I don't think that YouTuber is right. No, they're right. I'm like, why? Because you want it to be right. And then when these people wouldn't stop, I just had to start banning them. Because it's like, have an opinion, watch it and disagree with me.
Yeah, somebody would post something, they would watch the show, they would leave a comment, and then someone would argue with them having not seen the show. So Cameron insisted on a rule, which I think is a good rule. If you didn't see it, tell us. I'm not going to watch it, whatever. But don't argue with people who have seen the show and tell them they're wrong or quibble with them. You cannot get into that part of the conversation unless you've paid your admission, which is to watch the show.
Yeah, it's like saying I have an opinion on a book I won't read. I mean, that's just silliness. It's just I don't understand, because there are people still defending that and saying that people have a right to have an opinion based on secondhand information. I don't actually think that's true. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's an opinion. That's just some kind of tribal loyalty to somebody.
It's just parroting. It's just parroting, what somebody heard. I heard this from so-and-so's boyfriend who passed out at 31 Flavors last night. Remember that line?
Hearsay, yeah.
It's just, I heard this. It's like, well, did you actually see it? Well, no, but I know it's crap. Okay, well, how do you know that it is? Well, because somebody told me. I'm like, okay, that's, first of all, idiocy, and two, intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. Retro, your thoughts? Like, where were you with the fandom at this point? I know you were still kind of like not really watching Star Wars, maybe, dipping your toe in with Mando, Luke Skywalker. Where were you with the fandom at this point in 2021?
The fandom, I was a close watcher. I watched everybody. I'm a voyeur, so I watched every single review, every comment, and for Mando, it was just glowing remarks, back to form. This is it, and I was like, really? Okay, I'm gonna have to put this on my list to watch. So there was an excitement even after the attacks on Star Wars Theory happened. But there was a growing feeling amongst the fandom that something wasn't right. Why would somebody who worked for LucasFilm or somebody who worked for Disney attack a fan? It just seems so weird. And it built up this conspiracy theory, which was really, I don't think it was, because it seems to be true, that they did not like the quality, the fan, of who the fan was, that it was they wanted to change the actual fandom itself and make it something else. So it was so weird and so crazy. Like Get a Life was a lot of the things that were being said, and it's like, no, like you want somebody insanely addicted to your stuff so you can sell. It wasn't about the money. It was the principle of changing the culture, and which is really sort of upsetting and frustrating to me, because it's like, look, you want to be successful, just follow the formula that's right there in front of your face. You don't have to design it, just, and you'll make as much money as you deserve by serving the people who want that stuff.
Well,
and so
go ahead.
Yeah, and so at this point we can see that there's something brewing, but it's just you feel helpless because you know there's a big um, operation involved. You know, even on the side of the MCU with Disney, you could see huge issues and huge things going on with the quality of work that they're doing and also the focus of the movies that they're making. So
Well,
it's
the
just
fans, they were in the ascendancy at this point. When the High Republic came out too, I remember seeing this. Like, this is like concept art. It's a rock named it's a geode named Geode. I remember there was a vessel named the Vessel, and as a writer, I was like, these aren't creative people. What the hell is going on? Like, who comes up with this? So it was easy to laugh at the High Republic, and I was like, this is not going to sell. It was like. I was like, this is misguided Star Wars. This is off-brand. It's misguided. It's non-creative. And then on the other side, you've got the Mandalorian. You got Luke Skywalker. And you also have, in the Favreau camp, a rising star in a very heated space, the strong female character space. You've got Cara Dune. She's likable. The fans like her. She plays well when she talks. She's very authentic speaking when she was on that galleries thing on the behind the scenes. And in fact, there's this whole spate of announcements made at Lucasfilm, right? They're going to do a Lando story. They're going to do a Rangers of the High Republic series. They had about like 50 shows. Like, everyone was going to have a show. It was bizarre.
yes.
And I remember that one of the big ones that was getting some traction was this idea that the Favreau camp is going to have the Rangers of the High Republic, and it's going to star Gina Carano portraying Cara Dune as a ranger on the frontiers. So a major project that Favreau was backing with his rising star, the strong female character that was so desperately wanted out there, was based on Gina Carano. He was going to build around her and the success of The Mandalorian. And the fans were pretty much like, we're winning. Let's do this. Let's move ahead. Let's keep winning, right? So
now I need to interject because it actually ties into what Retro Nerd Girl is saying where we're about to go. Because what Retro Nerd Girl is saying is the feeling of powerlessness when people are like, you're seeing a segment of the company of Lucasfilm and Disney in general just going off of a cliff, and you don't seem to be able to stop them, right? And they're pulling the fans and everyone else down with them. You're feeling that, right? Guess what I felt as a screenwriter and filmmaker in the system at the time. We're talking about now 2021, whatever. We are still deep in the middle of the psychosis that existed in Los Angeles about COVID at that time. We're now almost 2 years into this, and by this time, it is a pure mass psychosis. It's a mass formation that's happening within the industry, where there's all these rules and things that even again, I would of the opinion that much of what was done has now been shown to be scientifically unnecessary, but certainly at the time, all the things that you have to stand 20 feet apart, all this, that's making production very, very difficult, right? The production process was very difficult. Making shows was difficult because you couldn't meet. And then as part of that is you couldn't question anything, right? Because everyone was so desperate to be in the right think around this at the time, right? Every single Zoom meeting, because that's all we had were Zoom meetings, had to begin with a COVID mantra. Oh my God, I had COVID last week. Thank God I got the vaccine. I still got but and then it would go into the trans mantra. But here's some good news. My school is now, my kids are all their best friends have declared they're trans in junior high school. Then you would go from the COVID mantra to the trans kids mantra. Then we could talk about business. I'm not exaggerating. It sounds like I'm exaggerating. This was an actual ritual. It was a Maoist struggle session ritual at the beginning of every meeting. You had to go through a COVID, prayer to the gods, and then you had to go through a virtue signaling about trans issues. So all of and identity and all this. And so what happens is you bring up about. So these are the two religious issues that everyone is afraid, because we're dealing with something like 1400s Inquisition in Spain, where people don't believe any of the stuff they're saying. They just want to be the next person sent to the rack. Right? That's what they're terrified of. And I, of course, being the obnoxious person I would be the guy that says, I would be the person on the call that would say, I'm really looking forward to never mentioning COVID again. And you would see everyone recoil and look at what's going to happen now? And the world would continue on. But I mean, that didn't help me. But it didn't, as I learned, it would make me enemies, as someone else would learn, because Ms. Carano starts getting becoming the enemy first on the issue of gender identity because they keep demanding that she lists her pronouns. And so she jokingly gives her pronouns because the pronouns have to be thee, they, them. It always has to be these three forms, right? He, her, his, or whatever. She should, all this stuff, z, zim, zam, whatever it was. And she came out with boop, bop, beep, right? And she put that out there to tease them. Look, how is boop, bop, beep any worse of a pronoun than z, them, right? You're just making this stuff up, right? And leave me alone. I don't want to get involved in this, right? By the way, at this time, just to let you know what was happening to me, I was almost crucified. I was crucified on a writer's chat room that I was involved in, where I told a funny story about how I had been involved in a Muslim writers group, and suddenly all these young Muslims were demanding that I list my pronouns like Gina, and I was like, are we getting involved in this too? We Muslims are doing this too now, right? I told the story in a writer's room and a chat room, and people laughed about it, and then one person didn't laugh about it. One person went after me and said, so you have a problem with sharing your pronouns? And then they wouldn't stop. They kept coming at me. And I would like, look, I'm okay with you. Whatever pronoun you want, I'll go with. I'll call you whatever you want. I just don't want to participate in this. I choose not to out of my religious beliefs. Can you leave me alone? They wouldn't. Like, what kind of religion are you involved in? Is this what Islam is all about? And then they wouldn't stop. And finally, they ended it with, you have proven your inhumanity. This is in front of famous screenwriters. The person that sent this to me has an Oscar. Right? Wow. Has an Oscar.
Oh,
and they did this in public to try to destroy my reputation. Right? This is before what happens to Gina. So I experienced how dangerous it is to go against the gender narrative and the COVID narrative. And guess what? She goes against both. She does this. And then she comes out saying that, because people that were questioning the narrative were losing their jobs, doctors were losing their licenses, people were being blacklisted, losing friends. I lost friends. I lost close friends. I actually didn't talk to close family members for almost a year because they wouldn't talk to me because I questioned Anthony Fauci on Facebook, right? And all this stuff. They were my relatives wouldn't talk to me because I said I posted, suggestions that maybe this thing might have been engineered in a lab, right? Shocking possibility, and they wouldn't talk to me for a year. So it was that kind of mass psychosis. And she puts this out there, and suddenly she has given Kathleen Kennedy the perfect ammunition. She's given her the perfect, because this is the mantra. This is the religious belief that everyone must adhere to. And she has questioned it in public. I did it on a private chat room and I was attacked. She did this in public. It's perfect.
What she basically says here is the problem. She has history is edited. Most people today don't realize that that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors simply hate them for their identity. And how is it? So she's drawing a contrast with this idea of the groupthink. And what Kamran's talking about, that if you have a view of dissent, if you have a differing opinion, if you're like, well, I don't know if I agree, the group's coming after you. And that is a dangerous place. That is a social phenomenon. And that's what she was commenting on.
And it was really happening.
And it was
happening. I mean, it is hard to imagine what we went through, where everyone was terrified. There were parts of the country that weren't like this. LA was the most extreme, where everyone was afraid and was policing each other.
Right. And at the exact same time,
I would walk out in this park with my elderly mother, and she's a medical professional, and she didn't want to wear a mask. It had prevented her from breathing as a 70-year-old woman, right? And so we'd walk out there and people would harass us. One guy chased us to the park with a dog because my elderly mother wanted to breathe in the open park, right? And so this is how he chased us with a dog. Didn't Nazis chase people with dogs? That happened to me.
It was crazy. I remember one time my mask broke and my wife was like, dude, don't even go out there, without a mask. I was like, well, dude, who cares? I'm outside. It scared my wife enough where she thought that just walking around without a mask was such a provocative display that it would get you in trouble. So that's what Gina Carano was talking about, which I find to be totally within reason, on that spectrum of vitriol that you find you'll always find vitriol on social media. This seemed to be on the safe side of the vitriolic type of a statement that someone could make. And so she makes this statement, and she is, and now they were gunning for her, right, Cameron? They weren't.
Well, they were gunning for her because of her gender inability to go along with the gender narrative, right?
Right.
And her inability to, she had to publicly identify with it. She couldn't be silent. Like I said, I was not allowed to be silent. I said, I do not wish to say anything. I will support all of you in your gender identities. I don't wish to list my pronoun. You can call me whatever you want. Silence is not acceptable. You must adhere to the flag. And so she was already the enemy. Now she gave them what they needed.
So my whole thought was that Lucasfilm, our Star Wars discussion, which we would rather be talking about Vader and Lando and Luke, but Lucasfilm is inserted themselves into this culture war at such a degree that they are leading this. Gina Carano, I would say, is one of the landmark cancel culture cases in the pop culture space. And Lorena, you want to do the honors of reading the Lucasfilm statement to the public?
Oh, I sure will, especially since this was dropped on social media.
Yes.
Gina Carano is not currently employed by Lucasfilm, and there are no plans for her to be in the future. Nevertheless, her social media posts denigrating people based on their cultural and religious identities are abhorrent and unacceptable.
Pretty charged language and a pretty cowardly way to dismiss somebody, in my opinion. And even the wording, they didn't say she's fired. She's not currently employed and won't be. Very, very passive aggressive, very soft. And this actually was frustrating because it's like, man, this is so like underhanded. Well, my take, and I don't think I'm alone on this at all, is that this was all driven by Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy. She has taken down one of the new capital city on Camp Favreau in this civil war in Lucasfilm. She took down Gina Carano. Not only does that mess up, and Cameron could get into this, not only does it mess up Rangers of the New Republic, a show that was going to be based entirely around her.
An entire series.
Mando season 3. Go ahead.
Yeah, so an entire series was thrown off the block, and from what I've been told, she was a central character of obviously Mando moving forward, and also Book of Boba Fett, which is about to film. So yes. The moment that this was happened, I can imagine Kathleen Kennedy and her minions going, "Yes, we found the exhaust port in Jon Favreau's Death Star. We can't stop this guy. We found this exhaust port. This woman who." And we know the one line in Hollywood that is easily used is any kind of thing that can be used to say that you've questioned the Holocaust, or you've compared anything to the Holocaust, or that you're saying that right-wingers suffering is like Jews being suffering on the Holocaust. Any reference to 1945, 47 events, that period of time, right? The 40s and the horrific events that happened at the time, and that is a sacred mantra of Hollywood, right? It just is. That's a red line. And so she knew that was a red line, that even as I was told that, that Jon Favreau desperately made calls and tried to save her. But when he saw that this was what they were going with, that they're going to make the claim that she's an anti-Semite, he's like, I'm out. I can't protect you from that. I can't, because that's one thing you can't get away with. Even now, even the events that have happened in the Middle East the last 2 years, that is still the one thing that will ruin your career in Hollywood. If people don't like what you have to say and they can put that label on you, you're finished.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Favreau, I would say, he played it pretty cool, right? He didn't get charged. He didn't make crazy posts. He didn't make public statements against anyone at Lucasfilm. He really played his hand quietly. He kept his cards close to the vest. And you almost get the impression, Cameron, like I did anyway, that he's like, let this blow over. I'll get you around the bend. Let's do a lap and I'll try to pick you up around the bend. But this damage continued. There was ripple after ripple. She ended up joining, she did an interview with Ben Shapiro, a blatant right winger on the Daily Wire. Now you're right wing. And in 2021, any affiliation whatsoever with any right wing, any leaning there, you are done. You have been,
and I don't think she
yourself.
shares a lot of his politics. Let me be clear. I think she's probably a little more conservative than most people in Hollywood, but I don't think she shares a lot of his politics. But they were the only ones willing to listen to her at the time.
Right. Cameron, I actually agree with you. They were the only place giving a platform to anyone who wanted to be. And by the way, I did watch the interview because I was actually interested in her. I was writing The Heroine's Labyrinth, and I made a post at this time. I was like, man, why are we getting rid of another? Because I saw all these great female heroines in Game of Thrones go down the tubes. I had all this stuff written about them, and I had to kind of trim it out because it became not that interesting. And I was like, what are we doing? You know, we're trying to bring all these women into create cultural figureheads with them, and now you're axing them. I never make political posts. I posted on my author page. I'm like, it's a shame that we lost Cara Dune. And, I'm just sorry to see, because I thought she was a good character and good for Star Wars. Dude, I got swarmed and I got unfriended by everybody just because and I didn't say anything political. I just said, it's a shame we lost a female hero. I'm someone who's writing about them. And, I don't like to see any of them disappear from the landscape, is what I was saying. That was it.
You were associated with, you are now a Nazi, a Jewish Nazi.
Now I'm a Nazi.
That's how they saw you, right?
I'll tell you the theory later, but this cost me, I believe, a win. I was a finalist in the Screencraft competition for cinematic book adaptation. They contacted me. They said I'm on a short list to win. They did an interview with me. They had me send all this information in. I made that post about Gina Carano, and then they announced the winners. I wasn't a winner. I wasn't a runner-up. I wasn't anything. And a couple weeks ago, I turned my profile on Coverfly to public. I popped up number 16 all time on Coverfly's list for best books to adapt into adapt.
Wow.
All the people who beat me weren't on the red list.
Of course.
So I had to hire
someone what happened. I have to step away. I have to step away for a couple minutes. I got to get ready for Breaking Fast. It's not quite yet, but let me step away and come back. So I'll be back in a minute. All right.
You got it. So I think that one post on Gina Carano cost me that, because this was peak cancel culture too, by the way. So anyway, I made that post. It was the only time I took something in the culture war where I was like, this is a shame. And I think I made that post like February 21st, 2 weeks after this post. And then the announcements were made like in March 10th or something. And I got nothing. So it's just interesting. But I remember this had some personal impact on me as well, because I took her side. I just didn't want to see her go from Lucasfilm. I thought it was a bad rap. And I think, and Lorena, tell me what you think here. I feel like this was a turning point in the culture war here behind the scenes.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you with that. When Gina Carano was unceremoniously fired, there wasn't a official public statement from Disney or from Lucasfilm. It was just dumped on social media on a Friday evening, where not many people were going to see it. And the uproar was so loud from the fans that we could just see this double standard that was going on. So Gina Carano gets fired, and thank you for pulling this up, Pedro Pascal can drop something like this and have no repercussions for it. And I'm just speaking personally, personally as an American who have had some ancestors who did fight for the Confederacy. It was just, first of all, it left a really, really nasty taste in my mouth, because the Civil War was not something to just dismiss. We lost a lot of blood and treasure, families fighting against each other, and the country was basically, one part of the country was basically devastated, and that would be the South. But to have Pedro Pascal basically put this up there, compare people to Nazis, and then people who voted for Trump, it's like, where do you get off with this? And Disney basically silenced his consent, right? Disney didn't say a thing or push back on this at all. And we as the fans could see that the mask was truly off when it came to Disney and Lucasfilm.
Well, it was an irreconcilable position, right? She gets fired. And now, and it's almost like you created the perfect science experiment in a laboratory. They're both stars of the Mandalorian. They both make posts, and I would argue this post is much worse. It's not referencing ideas behind a time period. It's saying these guys equal these guys, which was roughly half the country. So I mean, this was a worse post by the standards that they themselves set. And so now you've got two stars, one with a provocative thought, the other with a provocative, insulting, like a direct shot, and total silence versus you're axed, you're completely gone, which throws the whole Favreau thing out the window. So, you couldn't design a better comparison in a lab. Heath, I mean, were you privy to that? Like, were you following this when this happened?
I was not. I do remember when Gina Carano was fired, and I remember thinking, "Oh well, gee, she was the thing everybody liked." There was one of those instances where, of course, we had the hope again. We talked about, okay, man, we finally have hope again now that the Mandalorian is out, and everybody was riding that wave in such a big way. We just talked about season 2, incredible, ending so well, and then you get the rug pulled out of you. I remember, or out from under you. I remember that's how it felt. That, okay, well, here we go again. Oh, just when we got something going good, okay, here's the rug pull. I remember I remember a lot of people feeling like, or I felt like that.
Yeah,
I didn't get into all the details on exactly what was said and when. I had to look up that stuff much later. But I was like, okay, well, they fought back, and now we're back to square one.
Yeah.
And I haven't gone back and I haven't seen the Mandalorian season 3 yet. I mean, it sounds like this is when we're going downhill again.
You're not missing a whole lot.
Yeah,
No.
we'll cover that as well. But this, looking back, this was a little nuclear bomb that Kennedy launched, and this did do a lot of damage, serious damage to the momentum that Jon Favreau had within Lucasfilm, with the fans. It disrupted Mandalorian. Remember, Mandalorian season 3 does not come out next year. It doesn't show up until let's see, when does it come out? Not until 2023. So we're in 2021. There should have been Mando season 3 in 2022. Didn't happen because they had to rewrite all the scripts without Cara Dune. Rangers of the New Republic, gone. So the momentum that Favreau had was definitely disrupted, definitely put to a stop. And looking back, this was an extremely efficient and successful attack by Kennedy, in my opinion, from what I believe happened on the Favreau camp within Lucasfilm. It completely drew it to a stop. And as we'll see, this will continue to pick up where things start really going back to Kennedy's camp. I'll even go so far as to say she pretty much won the Civil War. By the time 2024 rolls around, Favreau's not able to do much, and we'll see that she interferes with other things as well. But one thing I wanted to point out during this period, and we'll cover this real briefly, a couple of shows did come out real quickly. This show I like. The Bad Batch came out. This is season 1. I liked it because it was really a spin-off of the Clone Wars. Same animation style, same feel. They just focused the characters on the Bad Batch. And something else came out that was a little bit more on the experimental side at this exact same time. So Bad Batch came out on May 4th, Star Wars Day of 2021. And then on September 22nd, Retro, you want to talk about this? We had another show come out on the experimental side, Star Wars Visions.
Oh yeah, the Star Wars Visions. This is like totally experimental. I'm not even sure what the budget was for this. They didn't spend a whole lot. Yeah, they didn't spend a whole lot on it. They didn't do a whole lot of advertisement for it. Has a small following of people. Fine. I think it's really cool. And it's basically vignettes of shows that were created from other countries. So you have inspiration that's like anime style and just like just completely different from anything you've ever seen with Star Wars. And
there were a couple episodes that I did like, but there was a couple that I was like, whoa, this is way off brand.
yeah, it's totally well. So I enjoyed it a lot and this is post I saw this after I was brought back in. So I hadn't fully been off of my what's the word, boycott, my silent boycott. But I've caught this later on when Visions 2 came out, which made me want to see this. So it's just a different take on Star Wars. It didn't even need to be called Star Wars, but there are like lightsabers in it, and I thought it was great.
So yeah, there's a couple of shows coming out. I would say not terrible shows compared to some of the other shows that we're used to from Lucasfilm, but a couple of there's more content coming out. Low budget. They spent $22 million to produce the first season of The Bad Batch and only $15 million to do Visions. I think this is a good, safe idea for Lucasfilm.
Yes.
Spend small amounts, experiment a little bit, and see where it goes.
Yeah,
and Cameron,
keep those
real
budgets
quick,
low.
this is what I wanted to end on.
Sure.
So at this time, after Gina Carano, after the Favreau camp has a lot of the wind come out of its sail, what is Favreau doing at the end of 2021? So at the end of 2021, December 17th, Jon Favreau's involved with Spider-Man No Way Home. And something happened in this movie, and I don't know if you noticed it or if you thought about it, but this always had a big impact on me. And to this day, I still think it's part of the culture war within Lucasfilm. He's in the movie, Jon Favreau. And this is when he's getting hot at Lucasfilm. One of the final scenes in Spider-Man No Way Home, which was a blowout movie during the end of COVID, right? They're saying the movie theater system is broken. They'll never come back. And then Spider-Man No Way Home blows the lid off that, grosses $1 billion, becomes one of the highest grossing films in American history, by the way. At the end of the movie, there's a scene. Spider-Man is in the background, and he's getting ready to hop out and fight crime in New York City, and the camera zooms in on a Lego piece of Emperor Palpatine. And what's on that desk in Peter Parker's room is a sewing machine with a Spider-Man suit in it, and this Lego Emperor Palpatine. And for some inexplicable reason, the camera closes in 2021 to Emperor Palpatine standing in the front of a sewing machine. And there was a theory going around, and I agree, that this was a signal from Jon Favreau to the fans. Star Wars is next. We're going to fix Star Wars next. Because as 2021 was moving in, he had a horse in the race. Kennedy's fighting back and sabotaging things behind the scene. But I'll never forget, there's this little bizarre clue. Why else would this be in Spider-Man No Way Home? Why devote 4 seconds in a close-up of a Lego character from Star Wars in a film that Jon Favreau's in? Cameron, do you remember this?
I noticed it at the time. I had the same reaction at the time because, he's a very, very good filmmaker. He knows the choices he's making, right? This is for the camera to stay on this little toy, because I felt it, something was off. And my intuition was, this is a signal. This camera to stay on this toy, which, people are like, well, he and his friend were always playing with Star Wars toys to call back to that. I was like, what callback? Callback to what? I mean, was this an important part of the Spider-Man franchise that we watched, that they played with his toys? I don't think so. I mean, but people are like, well, that's just a call. I mean, you don't focus on this thing for 5 seconds.
Yeah,
right?
You would edit this out, right? You would edit
it. Doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't serve a storytelling purpose, because I still don't know the linkage. It's such an unimportant thing that they played with Star Wars toys in the first movies together, right? If there was a point to be made about their relationship, that's not being made here, so that's bad filmmaking. And he's not a bad filmmaker, right? And it's a good movie. So this was done on purpose, and my reaction in the seat was, this is a sign of exactly what you said. They're sending a signal, because all of this nonsense with the Rise of Skywalker is all about how Palpatine survived. How did Palpatine die? He died firing his Force lightning. That was how he died, right? That's the moment. And then he's thrown over, and he's still firing that lightning as he plunges to his death in the reactor core, right? So. Right.
And then it exploded.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a signal, and it was an obvious signal, because he's learning. Favreau's learning. you can't face this Hydra straight on. You thought you could, but you cut off its head. 2 more came up. And this Carano thing, and he was hurt. He was hurt by everything that happened. Not just happened to Carano, but the fact that his momentum was derailed. And now people in the fandom are saying, well, Mando sucks. Why do you have Jack Black and this? That episode sucked. This isn't the feedback. Oh, they didn't want this. They were riding this high. They just wanted good filmmaking. They didn't want this garbage, right? And they didn't want to be forced to produce mediocre stuff at the last second because they have to scramble together. I've worked on TV shows. You have to plan them out a year in advance. If you suddenly told me that the character that we had for 6 episodes is gone, I have to, and we're filming tomorrow. That's an all-nighter that's not going to produce a great script to rewrite. That's what's going to happen.
That's right. Well, and you've explained, and others have as well, the length of time it takes for something to go from conception to product. It's 2-3 years, Yeah. But that scene with Palpatine as a Lego character only made sense to me. It doesn't make sense in the context of No Way Home. It only made sense as a signal from someone involved in Lucasfilm who's working in the movie that we're talking about, to have sent out this little clue that he intends to fix Star Wars. Literally, if you watch the movie, he's standing in front of a sewing machine, something that stitches things together, right? So I feel like this was a clue so now you're seeing evidence, they're in the big screen in a $1 billion film. There's this little Easter egg, I think, from Jon Favreau, the other party in this civil war, that he intends to fix Star Wars. And based on what he has done in this civil war that is starting to heat up, he's on our side. He's on the side of Star Wars. He's on the side of storytelling. He's on the side of the fans. He's on the side of George Lucas. He's on the side of the original vision, moving in to the next phase, hopefully. And I think,
I need to step away. I need to step away because the fast is going to break in a few seconds. So I'm going to go break my fast, and so I won't be here for the conclusion of this. So I want to add one last thought on that as I go, which is that, and I think the proof of the heart of what he's trying to do is in Skeleton Crew, which was a heartfelt children's show. People found nitpick this and that, but it was a good, fun show that certainly touched me. I loved it. And that was, by that time, Kathleen Kennedy had spent all of her Force energy on the Acolyte, that project that she had willed into existence against all odds. And she did it, and she blew, and it was literally the ring being thrown she threw her own ring into the cracks of doom with that, right? So she had no power to stop what they did with that. So to me, that was the sign. He's like, look, when this woman's out of gas, this is what I can do if you can just trust me a little bit longer. And that's how I'd like to end my section of this, which is I'm going to continue to trust him a little bit longer.
Yep. And I think Favreau knew what was happening at that point. I think his options became limited, and I think he did play it safe. Maybe a Yoda move on Dagobah.
Yeah, you got to survive. Part of it is survival. So God bless everyone. You have to wind down the thing. I have to step away, break my fast. It was wonderful to be on this. I really hope that the audience has as much fun as I've had participating in this.
Kamran, happy Ramadan. Thanks for being a part of all this. You've got great commentary, and this has been really interesting, covering the early part of the Civil War from 2019 to 2021. Thanks for being a part of it.
All right, God bless everyone. Stick around. There's more conversation happening. Take care, everyone. Peace.
Bye, Kamran.
God bless.
Good seeing you.
So, and by the way, this is where I plan to stop it. So we did make it about 2 hours. Next week, we'll also get into, just to give you a little preview, the Civil War heats up, and we will see some patterns between Favreau and Kennedy. The successful Star Wars is always overshadowed by some really tough Star Wars. So here's a little preview of what we'll be getting into next week. We'll be covering 2022 to 2023. And this was some big stuff, guys. This is where you get a glut of content flooding onto Disney Plus, some good, some bad. We'll have the Book of Boba Fett. Lorena, we'll talk about the Galactic Star Cruiser next time. The LARPing experience. We have the show Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor Season 1, Tales of the Jedi, the Willow series comes out, the Bad Batch Season 2, COVID officially ends, the writer strike begins, and Star Wars Celebration, the new Rey movie, is announced. And that, to me, was a pivotal moment in terms of what I believe is actually happening behind the scenes at Lucasfilm. And then it gets ugly from there. But next week, we're going to cover all this content that comes out rapid fire. And by the way, not all of it was terrible. So, Heath, just to wrap up the Civil War that we covered here between Kennedy's vision of Star Wars, as she ended with the sequel trilogy, the Favreau vision of Star Wars. Not only did it revitalize Star Wars, it launched Disney Plus. Let's not forget
Right.
that.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about this period, 2019 and 2021?
Well, it started with a lot of hope. So I mean, Star Wars had been this roller coaster. This was the up end, another up end of this roller coaster. When after having gone through, of course, the sequel trilogy, which was the down period, but now here we're up again, and feeling good and going, why didn't we just do this from the very beginning? And it really sucked that it ended on such a down note. And then we're about to get to the point where you said there's so much material coming out that even loses a bunch of people. But here, everyone was unified behind the Mandalorian. I mean, everybody watched it. Everybody enjoyed it. I mean, for the most part, that's when life was good again.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. I'm looking at this list. Really, only so you really had Mandalorian dominating Lucasfilm content. It was you had Bad Batch show up at the end, but I would say that's low key. You know, the animated Clone Wars guys, we liked it. Visions, hit or miss. Retro liked it. I kind of liked some of it, but I heard some people didn't. But it's really dominated by Mandalorian. So this wasn't a glut of content. This was a very, very small projects that mostly, I would say, mostly positive.
But people,
Lorena,
because that's all it was. People paid attention.
What's that, Heath?
I said, but people paid attention to it. So you didn't have as much, but people paid attention when that show was on.
You're right. It was still an event. It was an event. It was a water cooler thing. People were talking about the Mandalorian. It was. I know Cameron said it started poorly on the YouTube space, but it became well received. It was something fun to talk about on YouTube. Lorena, what are your thoughts on this? Looking back to sum it up.
Oh, it's like which one should I choose? Just how powerful the voice of the fans can be, to the point where something we thought would never happen would have, Lucasfilm actually turning on the fans. So it was a very eye-opening reality check, so to speak. That's kind of what I see this as.
Yeah, it was, and it got heated, right?
Very.
As a fan, it was the sequel trilogy era, which we covered, was basically you sit in the seats, you paid for the tickets, and you get blasted by the media in what became bad. It started as great Star Wars and then turned out as terrible Star Wars. And then, it's Lucasfilm versus the fans. Well, now that Disney Plus is out, the fans have taken to YouTube. Fans found their voice. Fans found their leaders and people to listen to. Fans found their rhythm. And now you've got an insider, Jon Favreau. And now you've got this kind of spilling out behind the scenes. You've got it spilling into social media. You got it showing up in the television shows. You've got two visions. So it really changed the whole dynamic, because as a fan, it was always you and the movie theaters. That's the only way to really experience Star Wars. Now, Star Wars is this other thing on streaming services, which was also part of the streaming wars. Mando had to compete against Netflix. It had to be good enough to draw eyeballs. You had Cobra Kai coming out around this time. So, you had to be able to compete for eyeballs. And Star Wars is front and center in this. Retro, what's your final impression of this? What stuck with you the most through this?
Well, what really is concerning for me was really the time period around the things that were happening around this time period as well, influencing this. Because I think this is where you get the beginnings of, I hate to say the word, but DEI was starting to kind of formulate.
Yeah.
Right after the pandemic, we had the killing of George Floyd, and then there was this huge effort by Hollywood making a lot of statements that they were going to make some changes to have more inclusion. And that really kind of was like the beginning of something we'll see later on a little bit more. But then you have I always go back to the MCU a little bit because it's sort of adjacent. It has the same DNA kind of seeping into this really awesome franchise, but then it started to shift a little bit with the same kind of thing that was going on in Lucasfilm, where we had WandaVision was a great show, and we had the movie Black Widow, which was like kind of good. It was kind of a weird one because people were kind of like, what are we doing with this movie that's about a person who's no longer with us anymore? And then we had Loki, which is also the same kind of thing, had like a female centric character that people were trying to figure out. Even though I enjoyed the series a lot, I think a lot of people weren't used to seeing the character change so much. And then it just seemed like the beginnings of the ball rolling was happening at about the same time of this little nugget in history that is going to really change what's coming up.
That's a good point. So 2020 was the George Floyd protests, which were, I think this was a massive event in the United States, and I would even argue the world, because this is where I noticed, and what was interesting, if you remember, I think everybody condemned what happened. I didn't see anyone defending. Like, this was something we were all unified, I felt like, as a culture, and said, no, we don't accept that. And yet it became something that I noticed. This is so we talked about earlier that you mentioned DEI.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this idea of the value system. Like, if you're a writer, what is your priority? And this idea of diversity or equity and inclusion being the number one priority. And how at the time I was just like, well, if those are priorities, you don't want to never be diverse, and I'll tell you the blunt truth. As a writer, you do want diversity, because having different kinds of people in your stories makes the stories more interesting on the whole. Now, you don't want to do it when it doesn't make any sense. Readers will be like, what's going on? But if you can change things up, you have different types of characters, different points of views coming in, different cultures coming in. It actually, as a writer, is something that is good and can freshen up a story. There is strategy behind it. I don't need to be told to do it necessarily, but it is a lesson to be learned as a writer. Sometimes you put a woman in a scene where it's an all-male environment, or vice versa. You create some tension there. So as a writer, diversity is good, but it can never be your number one priority. Your number one priority should always be, well, after 2020, not only do writers' rooms and studios begin to prioritize DEI as number one, priority numero uno, this becomes a cultural value. And I think DEI was almost kind of a mass cultural effort to place diversity, equity, and inclusion as priority number one in all things that we do. If you're an automobile manufacturer, a writer in Hollywood, a school teacher, this must take a doctor. This is priority number one in everything. Being a doctor is number two. Being a writer is number two. And I think this is where a problem occurred, specifically in the space of Hollywood and storytelling, where you began to see, this is where the Oscars, the Hollywood Corps of journalists, they changed the criteria to become an Oscar. Priority number one, it has to conform to DEI standards. So, any other comments? Because that's actually an important thing to mention that did happen here. Any other comments?
I think it came from, I think we've said this before. It came from a good place, but the idea of diversity and equality, inclusion, it doesn't seem like that's actually happening. It seems like there's a focus on specific individuals that are being centered in all the stories, and not really the entire population of people, specifically straight men, or straight men in general. Just not it's not cool. And so it's just sort of like, what's going on? That what are we supposed to show young men coming up, young boys coming up, as like, this is, these are your superheroes, these are like, it's not equal if you're going to make it a crime, or make it something that is obsolete, to have a certain group of people. That in itself is not equality. everybody should be included in this. It shouldn't be an exclusion of one type of person,
Right. Well,
is
and
what I'm
that's,
saying.
I agree. I felt like some of the diversification came with, it wasn't just diversification for the sake of diversification. It was like diversification with narratives about this, if we're going to include a woman, then these guys are misogynistic, these guys are this. It came with other narratives. It was like a package deal. It wasn't just adding more women, it was adding more women who thought this way. So and there was other things. There did seem to be some odd anti-Americanism. I remember when Superman, I fight for truth, justice, and the American way, they took that out. And I was like, what does that have to do with DEI? Why are you taking out a fundamental ethos of Superman? And it's the answer is obvious. They obviously don't like the idea of the American way. I mean, even poor John Mack, he had to say that Captain America wasn't about America when he was in Italy, and I don't even think he wanted to say that. But there is this, there seems to be other things attached, and I think those attachments kind of torpedoed the good. Like I said, I try to be clear that diversity is important. It is something that you don't want to turn against an entire movie just because it has, let's say, an African American or a Hispanic or a female lead, right? That's not a reason to hate a movie. Then you're just as bad as the people telling you have to do it this other way. So there is good diversity, there is good inclusion, but the way they did it made it the worst. It's like the worst.
Yeah, they did it with the exclusion, and also there was a lot of negative, hostile activities going on around it, which really made it insufferable to watch some of these movies and TV shows like She-Hulk, which is coming up. But
yeah, we'll get there.
yeah. But this is the beginning of it, and we're going to see the result once we get to 2022 for sure. And some of the shows and TV shows are just unwatchable. Some of them.
Yeah, I agree. You're right that we are going to be dealing with this for quite a long time at Lucasfilm and elsewhere as this moves front and center with an effort to make DEI a cultural priority across the board. So Heath, Lorena, any other thoughts on that?
The only thing that I just, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt
no.
you.
I was just saying, I think you guys got it. Go ahead, Lorena.
Yeah, no, yeah, agreed. I think you guys have it as well. You unfortunately have a subset of people who, if there's a woman that's a primary character, or if it's, I hate using that term person of color because everyone is a person of color, but to use nomenclature, if it's a person of color, oh, it's gonna suck. It's this, it's that. It's just no. You base it on the merit of the material
That's right.
that you're going to be seeing. So the problem, 9 times out of 10, the problem isn't diverse casting or a female lead. The problem is the material is lousy.
Correct. Yeah, and we'll get into it. Moses Ingram. What was she supposed to? There's no way that would have worked. There's no way. I don't care who you put it. So the problem is that, and this is why I think when you make this a priority to the writers, you end up pandering, or you end up doing something that shifts it in a weird way, and it doesn't come out right in the script. It doesn't come out right in the filming, and then when the audience watches it, they're not really on board with it. And my whole thing was, and we'll get into this next week with Obi-Wan and the Moses Ingram stuff. But the people that are really hurting you are those writers and your PR people telling you to attack. It's not necessarily the fans, but some of the fans for sure can't get over it. But my whole thing with calling out the good and the bad, don't call out the bad unless you know what is good and bad. You have to be able to tell the difference. So, and I caught a lot of flack for Barbie. Not everyone liked it. It was split, but you have to be able to spot excellence or something that's really good and not just condemn it wholesale because you don't like the casting choices. Because really, you're the same person at that point. You've become the opposite version, that you're against it because of something off the bat. You're prioritizing that as well at that point as a fan. So, well, anyway, this has been a fantastic discussion. I think we see Lucasfilm is right in the heart of all of this. You know, it's not just another player. They seem to be right there in the front lines of every part of the culture war that we see. And Star Wars is there. You know, it's almost amazing to remember that Mando launched Disney Plus, you know, helped launch the streaming wars, really. So anyway, well, I want to thank everybody real quick. So if anyone's listening and you like particular commentary, let's go around the corner. Retro, where can they find you?
You can find me right here on YouTube under Retro Nerd Girl and also on X as well.
Lorena?
Well, you can find me, of course, here on YouTube. You can also find me on X, and you can also find me on Instagram.
And Heath?
You can find me on YouTube on the Heath's Geekverse channel and also the Table Talk channel. And actually, I was just breaking out into the TikTok world. So there is also a Heath's Geekverse TikTok that you can also follow.
Excellent. Well, everybody, I just want to thank everybody for joining me again as we cover the history of Lucasfilm and the Kennedy era. We got some big stuff on deck, a lot to talk about next week. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.